I was up by 10:30. First thing of the day, call Teddy Cooper, of course. A boy took the phone, but Teddy quickly went to the receiver. "Hi, Mark," he said. "Good morning. Ferlin said to call you. The two you played yesterday, your own. Did you recognize them?" He laughed. "Certainly. So obvious? In a sense." "Okay," I said, slowing my voice. "What about them? How much more do you have?" "A couple of dozen. Do you think I could see them?" "Are you kidding me?" "Not at all. Me and Nick both want to see them. I think he will also be interested." "For what?" He paused and then said, "They're not quite ready. The two you played anyway. I need some finishing touches. But nevertheless, there is something in them." I felt both proud and disappointed. Damn, I thought they were ready a long time ago. On the other hand, I never really thought they were that good. "Here's the thing," Teddy continued. "I think maybe me or Nick or both of us can help you complete them." I was almost out of breath from surprise. Teddy Cooper and maybe Nick Harlan are going to help me finish my songs and then sing them. "Are you there?" "I'm here," I said. "So are you thinking about maybe recording them?" "Hardly. Not quite our style. But we know people who will probably like them and want to record them. We have an agent who will want to meet with you and probably represent you and all these other charms." "And what do you get from this?" "Royalty," he answered in surprise, as if I had asked a strange question. "We will help. We will get our share." I thought about it. "Quite fair, I think." "It won't be 50-50, he continued. "You've already done most of the work." "And how will it work?" "No idea. I think we'll figure it out as we go along. Percentage for each song depending on how many edits I or Nick or whoever else makes." I thought about his proposal for exactly 1 second. Either refuse, and then they will never be published, or agree, and perhaps get rich. "When?" "What?" "When do you want to meet?" I said. "I'll contact Nick and then call you again this week, okay?" "It suits me." I stared at the phone for 5 minutes after I hung up. The possibilities were endless. I could change careers, maybe try to make it to the top. I saw myself on stage, stadiums full of people who came to see Mark Roberts. Then the mood passed, and I grabbed my keys to go grocery shopping before heading to the football game. I was standing at the deli counter, waiting for my potato salad, coleslaw, and cheeses to be packaged, when I heard a voice behind me. "I thought you went to church." I turned around and saw Rebecca Galarza. "Ma'am," I nodded to her, smiling lazily and continuing to collect my purchases. But before I could move away with the cart, Rebecca deliberately crashed into it with hers. "You were good last night," she said, smiling brightly. "Very good. Thank you. Is this what you did in Memphis? When you weren't busy freeing innocent people and generally being a brilliant young lawyer, did you still have time to be a famous country singer?" "No, I haven't done this for a long time." At least he didn't speak in public. "And that's why you ran away here to Grant City, because we're kind of a mecca for bar bands, and you're trying to escape the law and become a music star." Her eyes and light, mocking tone said she was just having fun. It was infectious. I found myself smiling back, looking at her casual clothes, faded jeans, and a t-shirt. "Are you sizing me up, Mr. Southern Gentleman?" I laughed. "Sorry, but you look attractive anyway." "Attractive?" "Absolutely. You're a trickster." "I'm trying." "And you can do it," she said, raising an eyebrow and giving me an appraising look. "When you try. Do you have plans for today?" I hesitated and then said, "Sorry, but I'm afraid I have somewhere to go." Disappointment flashed across her face, but was immediately replaced by feigned gaiety. "Maybe another time." I didn't know what to do. She came into my bar maybe half a dozen times during my time at the hitching rail. Each time she ordered only 2 drinks, a gin and tonic and a lime, and left. I only spoke to her once, but I saw her in the company of other men. She was beautiful, but she was neither arrogant nor arrogant like many other girls who know that they are beautiful. On the contrary, she was mostly in a good mood and joked around a bit. She smiled easily, rarely frowned, wasn't overly dramatic, and seemed comfortable in her own skin. "Listen," I said, putting my hand on her cart to keep her from driving away. I really need to meet someone today. This, well, this is important to me. Understood. She relaxed and smiled that flirtatious smile again. I looked at the contents of my cart and then back at her. But still, I began, and then fell silent, trying to find the right words. What I'm doing today won't take much time. Then I need to cook for the week, which only takes a couple of hours. Are you asking me out on a date? She teased. I tensed, but she immediately added, because if you invite, then the answer is yes. Just tell me the time and place, and I will be there. I don't even know where to go here. I don't want to go to rail on my day off, and my apartment isn't exactly set up for guests. Still settling in. The furniture was included, just not the best. So you really have a bachelor pad? How was college? Exactly. I haven't seen these for a long time, she said, rubbing her hands. Can I invite myself to your place for dinner? My hesitation melted away at her delight. Her energy was infectious, like it was an adventure. I'll cook dinner, I said. I'll bring the drinks, she objected. Wine, beer, or something stronger. Your choice. I don't drink much. Got it, she looked into my cart. What will be for dinner? Sandwiches, I said. I love sandwiches. Sandwiches, she said, nodding. Then her face lit up again, and she added, sounds perfect. Give me your address, and I'll be there. I dictated the address to her. She smiled, walked past me with a light walk and whistle, continuing to do her shopping. Clarissa Talbot sat in the stands, slightly away from the others. The parents, who had known each other for years, chatted quietly among themselves, but few paid attention to her. However, why would they do this? She was relatively new to Grant City. I learned that he and Schuyler had moved here only 7 months ago. Besides, her cheap clothes from Kmart, her frail figure and tired appearance were not conducive to conversation. That's why she visibly shuddered when I sat down next to her and asked, can I join you? She moved slightly to the side and nodded briefly, which I took as permission. I've noticed that the last few times you've been here alone, I continued with a slight smile and a soft southern accent. Kind of like me. She tried to smile, but it came out weak and forced. Are you new here too? About a month, I confirmed. I settled into the stands and looked out over the field, immediately noticing Schuyler. He played as a midfielder. The boy seemed incredibly small and was drowning in his equipment, although the other children on the field looked no better. Is this your son? I asked. The one in the running back position. Schuyler, she replied, her eyes following mine, watching as her son received the ball and immediately turned around, rushing forward. He was knocked down by a big man at linebacker, but not before gaining 6 yards. I thought so, I said. You tense up every time he has the ball. She turned sharply to me, narrowing her eyes. So I wasn't mistaken. Have you been watching me? Nothing like that. I didn't follow or spy, I answered, smiling, but without taking my eyes off the field. It's just hard not to notice you. You and I are the only ones here who sit alone. We both stand out like a sore thumb. She snorted. Don't talk. I'm Mark, I said, holding out my hand to her. Clarissa, she answered, languidly shaking my hand. Her hand was thin and bony, and her grip was light and fleeting. How long have you lived here, Clarissa? We moved a few months ago. Me too. So we are both strangers. Looks like it. Where did you come from, Mark? From Memphis. What about you? Washington, D.C. Did you work for the government? I worked. And now? She smiled. Finishing my degree at Chadwick. What about you? Barman at the hitching rail. She looked at me directly, and it was clear from her face that she didn't really believe that I was just a bartender and didn't do anything else. And Schuyler? I said, trying to continue the conversation. How old is he? Almost 8. I nodded and looked back at the field. We watched the game in silence for almost an hour. Then, with a few minutes remaining in the fourth quarter, the visiting team began to advance. Down by 4 points, they still had a chance to beat the Grant City Generals, and the parents became visibly worried. The situation was heating up, and then a light rain began, which turned the already cool day into a downright nasty one. With a minute and 12 seconds left in the game, their quarterback threw a pass, and here you go. Little Schuyler, playing as a defender, somehow managed to get in the way of the ball and the boy who was trying to catch it. Schuyler immediately rushed to the other side of the field when I felt something squeeze my forearm. It was Clarissa, her eyes glued to her young son as he ran towards the end zone. The other parents were screaming, but I just smiled and watched as Schuyler was finally stopped near the middle of the field with a minute left in the game. His team and the crowd erupted with joy, and I stood up too, shouting, "Well done, man!" But Clarice, strangely, just seemed relieved that he was back on his feet. "He's fine," I said. She looked at me, then lowered her eyes to her hand, still clutching mine. Wrinkling her brow, she said, "Sorry, I just worry too much sometimes." "He just won the game," I said, "or at least saved her." "Yes, this is good. He'll have more friends now, right?" "Without a doubt." "Okay." She let go of my hand and turned away, avoiding my gaze. I took this moment to get up from the podium and quietly leave. I found out what I wanted to know. Clarissa Talbot and her son were alone against the world, and she was terribly afraid that something would happen to him. The smell hit her nose as soon as I opened the door, and her face showed that she was intrigued. "I thought you said there would be sandwiches." I smiled. "Cakes," I said with an accent, as if I were speaking Spanish. "Well, Mexican sandwiches." "I know what cakes are," she answered, walking past me into the apartment. I just didn't think. I guess I expected it to be ham and cheese or something like that. Boring. I lifted the bag from her hands, looked inside, and took the beer to the refrigerator. "I thought it would be a safe choice since you said you didn't drink much," Rebecca called after me, standing in the hallway and looking around the empty room. In fact, empty is putting it mildly. The room had an old sofa and coffee table that had probably seen better days under Nixon, and a small TV on the cabinet with a DVD player connected. In the corner stood my guitar on a stand, next to it was a music stand. In the alcove that served as the dining room, there was a cheap table and 2 chairs. That's all. No paintings, no decorations. The time was told by the clock on the microwave. "Have you really been living here for a month?" "Yes." "And that's all you have?" Home sweet home. But, damn, Mark, where's your furniture? Even in the dorms they hung posters on the walls. Don't tell me the bedroom is like that too. I laughed, and then turned and walked towards the corridor, waving for her to follow me. "Not exactly a Hilton," I said, opening the door. She looked inside and stopped. There was a mattress on the floor in the corner. It was neatly covered with sheets, pillows, and a blanket, but it was still a mattress on the floor. There was an alarm clock and a stack of books on the floor nearby. The closet door was slightly open, revealing a dozen white shirts and half a dozen pairs of jeans neatly hung on hangers. Downstairs in the closet were 3 pairs of shoes, brown loafers, and 2 pairs of white Nikes. "And what do you do when you're not working?" I closed the door and answered, "I eat, sleep, and play the guitar." "Is it true?" She came up and pinched my ribs. "Then you should eat more and play the guitar less." "You're probably right," I said, heading into the kitchen. I walked straight to the small pot and pan on the stove, quickly stirring them. In the first, the meat was slowly stewed, and in the second, the onions were caramelized in butter. "Smells delicious," she said. "This is kind of my version of a Mexican sandwich with braised short rib, caramelized onions, and queso fresco cheese." She inhaled the aromas of beef, garlic, thyme, and red wine, then caught the scent of onions in the butter. "Are you a gourmet, or what?" I patted the book lying open on the counter. "A whole cookbook with recipes for gourmet sandwiches, from that guy who often appears on cooking shows. So when you talked about sandwiches, you weren't kidding." I smiled, then opened the freezer. It was filled with neatly labeled plastic containers containing various meat and vegetable sandwich fillings. Every Sunday, I prepare several fillings, then freeze them. During the week, I buy cheese and bread, and here is a ready-made dinner for you. "Is that all?" "Usually more soup. vegetable or tomato, sometimes salad. You know, the ones that are sold almost ready-made. She laughed. Bachelors. I smiled. Have you ever heard of Warren Zevon? She shook her head, frowning slightly. He was a singer and songwriter. One of my favorites. Anyway, about 10 years ago, he was diagnosed with cancer. Lung cancer. I will never forget reading this news. He was given about 6 months. He smoked all his life. Anyway, when they asked him what he regrets, what he will miss most, do you know what he answered? She shook her head again. For sandwiches, he said. I really like sandwiches. When a tribute album to his songs recorded by Jakob Dylan, Bonnie Raitt, Jackson Browne, and Bruce Springsteen was released after his death, the album was called Enjoy Every Sandwich, and I thought he was right. I hadn't thought about it before, but I really love sandwiches. But every meal, Rebecca asked in surprise. What can I say? I said, smiling and shrugging. He was right. I really love them, and I don't want to regret at the end of my life that I didn't eat enough of them. Well, you definitely need to eat more, she said, poking me in the ribs again. Do you really think I'm too skinny? I asked, taking fresh rolls out of the bag and cutting them before placing them on a plate. This didn't really surprise me. This may not be the case with girls, but guys could definitely be too skinny. Everyone always liked my brother Stevie because he looked like what a man should look like. And I always looked like an accountant or programmer should look, only without glasses and with slightly long hair. I'm just kidding, she said, as if reading my thoughts. I rummaged through the refrigerator, then pulled out 2 bottles of beer and a container of potato salad. It makes me, well, I don't think I'm particularly attractive. But does it make me less attractive? I looked at her openly, opening the beer and handing her 1 bottle. She began. No, I seriously want to know. Maybe I should exercise or something. Do you think this will make me a better person? I took a sip of beer and she took a sip of hers, clearly thinking about how to respond. Turn around, Rebecca finally said. I looked at her, then turned away, placing the meat and onions on the buns and sprinkling them with cheese. Well, I asked, opening the potato salad and adding it to the plates. Can I turn around already? Perhaps I was too critical. Maybe. Probably. I turned to face her. Our noses were almost touching, and a wide smile appeared on my face. You let me know when you're sure, okay? Her eyebrow raised, she looked at me for a moment, and then, without any warning, she leaned in and kissed me. Let's go, she said, taking my hand. Dinner can wait. She pulled me into the bedroom, and I willingly followed her. 15 minutes later, we were sitting at my small dining room table eating dinner, both wearing only our underwear and t-shirts. Very tasty, she said, having finished almost half of the sandwich. It would be even better if it was hot. Anyway, you're right. I think I'll start eating more sandwiches. I smiled, took a piece of the sandwich, and began to chew, all the while looking into her eyes. What? She finally asked. Tonight. What was that? She shrugged. You just looked like you needed to relax, and God knows I needed that too. I thought about it. After a minute of silence, Rebecca asked, Did you like it? That's putting it mildly. Wasn't I too pushy? No. You can seduce me any time you want. And my body? You think that I? Pretty much perfect, I said, smiling at the memory of her body still being there, within reach. Practically, she asked playfully, remembering our previous conversation. Well, I didn't have time to take a closer look at everything. It all happened pretty quickly. Like what? She raised an eyebrow and grinned. Well, you know, I said, toenails and things like that. She laughed. Toenails? And other things. We finished dinner in comfortable silence. When we finished, I stood up, cleared away the plates, threw the leftovers in the trash, and grabbed 2 bottles of beer from the refrigerator, opening them and returning to the table. Why me? I asked. Because you're cute. I raised an eyebrow, expecting a more detailed answer. You're a mystery, she said, taking a sip of beer. You're sweet, but quiet. Obviously, you just went through a divorce, and I'm sure you're still suffering because of it. And it was very obvious that you were a little insecure right now, so I decided to kill two birds with one stone. Shot, I had fun and showed you that you have nothing to be ashamed of. I thought about it, then nodded and took a sip of my beer. So it was some kind of comfort sex? Her eyes narrowed, not sure if I was serious. No, it wasn't comfort sex. She seemed serious, not just pandering to my insecurities or flattering my ego. Seriously. For the first time, a woman was serious with me. I wondered how long it had been since Sandy had actually been honest with me instead of putting on an act. And then it dawned on me. Sandy. Oh my God, I'm still married. At this thought, my head dropped to the table, and I stared at the label on the bottle of beer in front of me. In a quiet voice, I said, I'm not divorced yet. I felt Rebecca tense up against me. But you said, at the bar, you don't have a ring, and when you asked me if I was divorced, I said something like that. Well, I guess as far as the great state of Tennessee is concerned, I'm still married. Technically, yes, I ran away, that's true, but we haven't even started the divorce process. Her face first showed confusion, then shock, followed by frustration and finally anger. So what's going on? Rebecca asked with a hint of sadness in her voice. I took a deep breath and looked at the wall over her shoulder. When I spoke, my voice was flat and emotionless. I tried not to relive it, tried to soften the blow that I knew I would have to feel by saying it all out loud for the first time. Sandy, that's her name. I've been in love with her since forever. But she was always crazy about my brother. They dated all this time, and I was always somewhere in the background. She probably liked me, you know, like a friend or a brother, but her real passion was Stevie, my brother. I chuckled bitterly. In truth, she was probably barely aware that I even existed. So why didn't she marry him, your brother? He died. A little over 8 years ago, he died in a car accident. I glanced at her. Lips pressed tightly together, eyes narrowed, arms crossed on the table as she leaned towards me. She looked like she was preparing for a tough cross-examination, like a real lawyer. After that, they brought us together, I continued, focusing again on the wall. A little over a year later, our parents decided that Sandy and I would make a great couple. Pushed or forced, everything is organized. So it was an agreement? Rebecca asked in surprise, leaning back in her chair. Why did they do this? Because of the popular vote, I said. Sandy's dad ran for governor, and it was great political theater. What about your parents? Why did they agree to this? For about the same reason, I suppose. Plus the opportunity to do a great favor for the governor. He would owe them a debt. And you knew about it and just agreed. I looked into her eyes and continued, looking at her seriously. I found out about it the weekend before I left. Her face expressed doubt. You didn't even suspect? Something like that? No way. How can you do something like that to your own son, without saying a word to him? How did you know? I overheard a conversation I shouldn't have heard. Sandy's parents and mine. They laid it out in great detail. Are you sure you didn't misunderstand? Damn it, Rebecca, I said. I'm a lawyer too, you know. I still have at least a little common sense. Sorry, she muttered. It's just kind of weird. You know, like in India, arranged marriage. I shook my head. Only partially. She agreed to it, knowing full well what was what. All she had to do for me to agree was to offer me the woman of my dreams. The woman I had dreamed of since childhood. I fell for it, like fish on a hook. She knew you didn't know. I smiled. Very insightful, and that's the million-dollar question. Rebecca tilted her head. So, you don't know? I shook my head, and I'm still trying to figure out why that should matter. She pursed her lips and said, There's a big difference, I think. In one case, you were both deceived. In the other, only you were deceived, and she was in the know. I shrugged. But in the end, it still wasn't a real marriage, at least not for her. Was it for you? Yes, until I found out the truth. She leaned back, studying me carefully, her thoughts gradually becoming clearer. Now do you understand what I meant? I asked. It's not that I got divorced. It's more like I wasn't married at all. But you loved her. But she didn't love me. For her, I was a lover for 6 years. Are you sure about this? Are you sure it's just this? I shrugged. No, I'm not sure. But I'm also not sure it's a big deal. Why? Her words. At the time, I thought it was just her charming, weird humor. Now, looking back, I realized that all of this could be interpreted in different ways, and most of those interpretations are bad. And when you heard all this, you just left? No, I said, my eyes staring back at that spot on the wall. It took me 2 days. Speak, she insisted. Something else happened these 2 days. What? My father, I replied, looking at her and extending my hands across the table. She hesitated, but then put her hands on mine. I found out I have a brother, or at least a little boy for whom my father's campaign committee is paying child support in an attempt to hide it. Her eyes widened. I nodded. And he's here, in Grant City. His name is Skylar, and he's almost an exact copy of me at his age. And who is his mother? She worked for my father, either as an assistant or a secretary, something like that. And you came here to find him? I nodded. For what? I don't know yet. She thought. Her gaze became distant. Her fingers lightly drummed on the table. You can't say anything, she muttered, more to herself than to me. If this gets out, the boy will suffer. He doesn't need it, and neither does any child. And maybe she doesn't either. I silently looked at her, realizing that she was saying out loud what I had long ago come to. I thought it was obvious, she muttered after a moment of thought. The real question is whether your mother knows, Rebecca continued. Probably not. Her eyes twitched slightly, then focused on mine. You are sure? Pretty sure. If I had even a glimmer of suspicion, I would have noticed it. Even my mother couldn't hide something like that so well. She would have ruined him if she had found out, or she would have ended it altogether. That's your advantage, Rebecca said. What do you want him to do? What do you want to achieve? I shrugged. I think I just want to get to know my little brother. I don't want revenge. I don't want to deal with anyone. I just want to stay away from them, all of them, as far as possible, and start over somewhere else, away from everyone. From everyone? She asked with a slight sparkle in her eyes, but it was a soft shine. Sorry, I said, looking down. I just didn't mean to. She reached out and lifted my chin. Perhaps I was a little too pushy. I'm not trying to make excuses, but you're a guy and well, I was completely naked before you could say anything right. How could I have expected you to say, wait, I have to tell you a long, complicated story about how I'm sort of married, but not really. I mean, that's not what you'd say, right? Be either gay to the core or dead to stop it all, right? Still, I began. Still, she agreed. I don't usually sleep with married guys. You're only the third, actually, and the first two. Well, one was. Let's just say, only one of them actually used me to cheat on me. I didn't mean to. No, she interrupted. It's not the same. Everything is different here. I don't know how, but I know that after the first time I felt cheap, used, like a piece of meat. Not during, but after. Now it's not like that. It's not like that, I assured her. I swear, it's just, I guess I don't feel married anymore. She's like an old flame. Sandy, that is. Like an ex-girlfriend, but not like it was ever a real marriage, you know. She smiled sadly. No, I don't understand, and I'm really sorry that you do, because what they did to you is the most terrible thing I've ever heard, and I've heard a lot of terrible things. I nodded. So you're just going to stay here and do nothing? Rebecca asked after a short pause. What do you mean? I mean, you have to move forward. You have to act. Your running here was a reaction. Now you have to be proactive. What are you suggesting? For starters, divorce. I hesitated, then said, but right now the only place you can do that is in Memphis. On her territory. I haven't lived here long enough. She smiled. You're wrong, Mark. It's a game like poker. You apply here, and what will she do? Ask to move the case there. Do you think her father will let her do that? Right in front of all these Memphis journalists? She shook her head. Don't think. I smiled for the first time in a long time. And that's not all, I said. Her father is preparing to campaign for the White House. So he'll definitely try to keep it all quiet. I felt my muscles relax and leaned back in my chair. I didn't even realize I was so tense until I felt it release. For the first time in a long time, I felt real relief. Even Rebecca's next question couldn't ruin that feeling. There's only one question left, she said. Which? What will you do if she challenges this? Are you really ready to show all your cards? Ruin not only her father's career, but possibly yours too. I smiled. She won't dispute it. The threat alone will be enough to make her back down. She'll do whatever her father says. You are sure? Asked Rebecca. Absolutely. But as it turned out, I was wrong. I was completely wrong. Early Tuesday morning, I was sitting in the office of the law office of Taylor and Galarza. At 10 minutes past 10, the door behind the reception opened and Whitney Patterson saw me, made a brave attempt at a smile, and beckoned me to come in. I hesitated for a moment, then stood up and followed her. I thought Rebecca was doing this. She passed it on to me, Whitney said. If you're uncomfortable, tell me now and we'll reschedule with someone else. We entered a small office littered with files and notebooks. But Rebecca said, she slept with you, and that changed everything, Whitney said as she sat down at the table and motioned me to the chair opposite me. Did she tell you? Whitney nodded. Yesterday afternoon, after the meeting was set up. About the time she realized this could be a serious conflict of interest. Why? Because lawyers are not allowed to sleep with clients. It's strictly prohibited, a quick way to lose your license. I thought about it, then nodded. Okay, how long have you been doing this? I've been working as a lawyer for 9 years, and I've been doing divorces and civil cases for the last 7 months. I used to be a prosecutor. She raised an eyebrow, as if inviting me to question her qualifications. I shrugged. Okay, it shouldn't be that hard anyway. That's what Rebecca said, and she understands it. That is? Whitney's face frowned, clearly contemplating how to respond. Finally, she decided that the truth would be the best way. She was my ex-husband's lawyer in my divorce. She did a good job of pointing out the obvious, so she has experience. She said it was a piece of cake, so it was. Did she represent your ex-husband against you? She nodded, smiling faintly. And now you work for her. I'm a good lawyer, and they needed someone with trial experience. But are you friends with your ex-husband's lawyer? Weird, huh? What can I say? She wasn't a complete bitch. If anything, she knew her cards, played fair, and made sure the process went as smoothly as possible. You know what happened. Why should I blame her for offering something the judge would have given me anyway? I didn't say anything, just looked at her. Lawyers are definitely a different breed of people. So, Whitney said after a moment, picking up a pen and preparing to write on her notepad. Ready to start? I nodded. I spent the next half hour answering her questions and then left with a form where I had to fill out information about my financial situation and other details, right down to my favorite brand of panties. We set up another meeting for Friday morning so I could sign the paperwork and get the whole process started. On Tuesday night, Rebecca and I had dinner together. Cuban sandwiches with tomato soup. Rebecca stood next to me, her hip pressed against the kitchen counter as I pressed sandwiches and heated soup. Whitney and I talked, she said. Oh, you told her almost everything. Yes, almost. But you didn't mention the real reason you're here, your little brother. I stirred the soup and thought for a moment, then said, "Does she have to know this?" "I think yes." "And you didn't tell her?" "No, I wasn't sure you'd want her to know that." "Then why are you bringing this up?" "Because I want you to tell her yourself." "What if I don't tell?" "Then she definitely won't know it from me." I looked at her. Her deep brown eyes seemed to penetrate straight into my soul. "I understand how hard this is for you, Mark," she said, her voice softening as did her gaze. "I don't want to force you to do anything. But on the other hand, I don't want us to be hit by a hurricane that even your own lawyer doesn't know about." I nodded. As a lawyer, I knew she was right. But as a person, I wanted to keep it a secret. "Let me think about it, okay?" "Fine." I finished making the sandwiches, poured the soup into bowls, and took mine to the table, Rebecca following behind me. She dipped the sandwich into the soup, took a bite, and chewed it slowly, keeping her eyes on me. "What?" I asked when she finally swallowed. She smiled. "Just because my last name is Galarza doesn't mean you have to cook me Mexican and Cuban food every time I'm around." I laughed. "Come here," I said, taking a bite of my sandwich, then pushed back my chair and walked over to the freezer. I opened the freezer door and she looked inside. "From left to right," I said, nodding toward the sticker containers filled with frozen sandwich fillings. "From Sunday to Saturday. Yesterday there was Mexican beef ribs, yesterday there was Thai chicken stir-fry, and tomorrow there will be pulled pork, and so on." She looked at me and giggled quietly, covering her mouth with her hand. "God, you must be the most meticulous man I have ever met." "What can I say?" I answered, closing the freezer door. "I am also a lawyer. I like everything to be in order." She just shook her head and returned to the table. We finished dinner and then went for a walk, talking easily and naturally. Neither of us took the initiative to do anything more intimate. Silently, but clearly, no more relationships before divorce. When Rebecca left, kissing me on the cheek before leaving, I almost called Whitney to speed up the process. Knowing that they were discussing me and what happened between me and Rebecca, I changed my mind. If I rush it, Rebecca will probably punish me for it. This got me thinking about Rebecca. She was in her 30s, independent, smart, witty, and seemed to excel at everything. And yet she never married. Why? This question stuck in my head, and I couldn't figure out why it was bothering me so much. "Can I ask you something?" I said to Ferlin Fargo while I was wiping down the bar after lunch. "Ask," he said, without looking up from the newspaper. "You're divorced, right?" To him. "What is it like to be divorced and start dating again?" "It sucks." "Why?" Finally, he looked up from the newspaper, his lips pursing as if he was contemplating an answer. "It's simple," he finally said. "I and you too, by the way, we didn't just suddenly become free again, as in our youth, when all the choice was among young, sweet, and innocent girls." "How old are you?" 30. 32. He nodded. "I was 36, but it's almost the same thing. The problem is that single women in their 30s are usually one of two types, either divorced or those who are completely unsuitable for marriage. Not fit for marriage. They don't want to get married, or if they're in a relationship, it's so unbearable that it all falls apart before marriage. Or they're having trouble getting into serious relationships," I added, "too independent and don't want to be tied to anyone." "Yes, this happens too," he agreed, putting the newspaper aside and leaning towards me. "And then there are divorced women. It's difficult with them too." "Why?" "We need to understand why they got divorced. Were they wasteful? Too demanding? Have you cheated?" "It's not always the woman's fault," I noted. "These qualities could also apply to their ex-husbands." He smiled and nodded. "Exactly. This means they will be very careful. The worse their marriage was, the more their husbands cheated on them. For example, the more suspicious they will be of all men." I thought about it, then asked, "Why did you and Denise get divorced?" He shook his head sadly. It's my fault. I was a workaholic. So why are you still seeing each other? We love each other. She is the only one for me. Always will. What about her? Loves me to death, but cannot live with me. He can't stand all those nights when I work until the morning, all those weekends when I'm home for 4 or 5 hours, and then leave again. This is not life for a family, not life for marriage. Have you ever thought about working less? His smile was sad. Sorry, buddy, but this is my essence. It's like asking a leopard if it can change its spots. It won't work. And she knew about this when she married you. It wasn't like that at first, but over time it became like that. But you still spend time together? When we can. We're just not staying married. It's a pity. Yes, he said, sighing. If only. I thought for a long time about what Ferland said. It's not enough to just get rid of one problem only to be faced with a bunch of others that I'm not ready for. No, I had to seriously think about what would happen after the divorce. Let's take Rebecca, for example. She was a year or two older than me, perfect and still single. No one, not herself or anyone else, had ever mentioned being in a serious relationship with anyone in her past, which was strange. Women her age, judging by my secretary, my wife, and other women I knew at least occasionally mentioned their ex-boyfriends, even if only to complain about them. But not a word from Rebecca. Was she really too independent for marriage? Or did the very thought of marriage make her sick? Although, why should I care at all? We only slept together once, and the number of meaningful conversations we had could be counted on two hands. And yet I liked her. She was the first woman with whom I felt alive after learning about the meanness to which I had been subjected for more than 7 years, and it was a little scary that she might be the best opportunity I'd ever come across as single life loomed ever closer. Whitney was another example. She cheated on her husband, and yet, as I understand it, she was never truly happy in her marriage. Does this mean she can never be happily married? Or what will she change again at the first sign of dissatisfaction? Although I didn't have any romantic thoughts about Whitney, I was afraid that she might be a prime example of one side of the divorce coin. I've seen the other side of this coin too often. Women who were so unhappy, and often for good reasons, that they thought all men were worthless jerks. They openly expressed contempt for men at every opportunity, and then looked at the men gathered nearby, as if challenging them to an argument. I never wanted to deal with such a vixen. The worst option, however, was the one Ferland described his and Denise's story. You've seen it, when people get divorced but still love each other to death. Any new man in such a woman's life will be constantly and critically compared to her one lost love, and no one will ever be able to compare with this. By Friday morning, I decided Rebecca was right. It was necessary to move forward and be proactive. So I showed up at the office, reviewed the paperwork, and signed the divorce petition and several associated forms. I also spent 10 minutes telling Whitney about my little brother. She sat with her mouth open, and when I finished, she said, "Is everyone there really bastards?" On Sunday afternoon, I spent 5 hours with Teddy Cooper, perfecting what I thought was my best song. By the time he finished criticizing it, I was sure that this pathetic work was not worth saving. "Is that a chord?" he asked, going over the progression in question. To him. "I would do it like this," he said, playing a progression of suspended chords. This changed the sound significantly, just as I expected. "Of course," I said. "Sounds better and everything. But are you sure this is really appropriate?" "If we add an augmented chord here," he said, then began increasing the chord progression of the entire song, bar by bar. When we finished a couple of hours later, my original chord progression was still recognizable, but just barely. Then we spent an hour revising and clarifying the text. It was both fascinating and depressing to watch his mind work. His thoughts and suggestions almost always hit the mark and fired like bullets from a Gatling gun. We spent the last hour trying to come up with the connection he insisted the song called for. He was right, and I've been trying to do something similar for a long time. Taking what I thought was one of my best inspirations, he smiled and said, Close, but let's work on the lyrics and progression. By the time I left, almost 6:30, I wanted to get home and burn all my other songs before he could take them apart. He must have sensed my disappointment because his hand on my shoulder stopped me at his front door. Mark, yes, you're actually pretty good. Maybe you're not great yet, but you have a talent for this. Well, yes, of course, I said, getting ready to move on. His hand squeezed my shoulder tighter. You know, most of the songs Nick and I write take a long time. Yes, sometimes they come to you very quickly, and we almost finish them in a day or two, but most take days or weeks. Some even months or years before we return to them, and a new idea strikes us. I nodded, not really believing him. In one day, you have a track almost ready for publication. There are some minor rough edges left, but I'll let Nick listen and let him think. There is one feeling that haunts me, but either way, it's really damn good. I looked at him and said, it's almost not the same song at all. Nonsense. Same words with a couple of changes, same chord progression, just jazzed up a bit, and the same melody, except that something has been changed by 7 or 8 notes. I shrugged, but I would never think of such things. He smiled. This is my job, man. 7 days a week, 365 days a year. You become good at something when that's all you do, right? God, I hope so. Because right now I feel absolutely not good enough. He let go of my shoulder and lightly hit my bicep with his fist. Don't think like that. You'll get better, you'll see. Okay, I said, picking up the guitar case next to the door and opening it to go out. Already on the porch, I stopped and turned around. Hey, Teddy? Yes? Don't let Nick listen to it without me, okay? Why not? I want to see how his mind works with her, you know. I think this way I'll learn faster. Sure, dude. Fine. When he's free, I'll call you and we'll arrange everything. Thank you. Next week, then. See you, I said, raising my hand in farewell. I still felt dumb as a plug. On Monday morning, feeling came over and asked if I could play again the following Saturday night. Same time, same equipment, same everything. Apparently, the Golden Rodeo still hasn't recovered. Of course, I said. Great, he replied, taking 4 posters from the closet announcing my upcoming performance. I hate to think that I wasted my time printing them out so you could tell me to go to hell. Wednesday night, it was my turn to sit at Rebecca's table while she prepared dinner. Whitney was there too, and it seemed only natural since there was no chance of mischief until everything else was over. What are you going to do when this is all over? Whitney asked. I have no idea. I'll probably just continue bartending for a while. And this doesn't tire you? With that kind of education, after all these years of appellate work, you're going back to bartending? I like it. I don't stress too much, and it's nice to be around people who aren't always under threat of the death penalty or suing oil companies and things like that. But you'll get tired of it, Rebecca said. When this is all over, I'll give you about a month, and then one day you'll be standing behind the bar and you'll say to yourself, what am I even doing here? Picking up women, I replied. She turned and smiled at me. Crazy. Whatever, Whitney insisted. Don't you want to go back to your old job? I am not licensed in Illinois, and I will not be returning to Tennessee. Never. What about teaching? Rebecca suggested. Don't know. Never tried it. Not such a bad idea, Whitney said. Chicago itself has, 6 law schools? We're also close to Marquette, Madison, and DeKalb, Rebecca added. I laughed. Really? Can you imagine me in front of a class full of knowledge, hungry law students, telling them about civil litigation or contracts or something else? Actually, Whitney said, looking at me appraisingly, yes, I can. Just stay away from the students, Rebecca interjected. And with your resume, I'm sure one of the schools could give you a chance if they have an opening. I shook my head. I doubt it. Whitney took out her PDA and typed something in it. I'll call tomorrow and find out what's going on. Is this part of your job as my lawyer? She looked at me and smiled, but Rebecca answered for her. She knows what it's like to get divorced. You just give up for a while, looking for change, whether it's good for you or not. She doesn't want you to end up in the same boat as most of our clients. Has this happened to you? I asked Whitney. She shook her head. No, but only because Rebecca caught me one day when I gave up, right after I left the Dawes office. She set me on the right path. And you do this for your other clients? She owes you, Rebecca said. That's why she tries her best. Obligated to me. When you played that song a couple of weeks ago, the one where you said you wouldn't play it again until someone asked us to dance well, someone asked her, and now she's dating him. I looked at Rebecca, then at Whitney, who smiled shyly. Her hero, by the way, Rebecca continued. Shut up, Whitney said. Come on, you know it is. Whitney looked at Rebecca, then at me and said, so far, so good. First time after divorce? She shook her head. No, but this is the first one who didn't just try to get laid and disappear. I put my hand on her palm. Well, I'm happy for you. She grabbed my hand with both of hers and said, Trust me, Mark, it gets better. Is it true? It just seems to take forever. I was still hesitant to approach Clarice Talbot, and Rebecca and Whitney kept pushing me to come up with something. Frustrated, I decided to go on a cold visit to her home. Hell, we sat next to each other for 2 matches in a row, so I wasn't exactly a stranger to her. So on Thursday evening after work, I went to her door and knocked. When Clarice opened the door, she looked confused, and I said, Do you have a minute to? Clap. She slammed the door right in my face. My eyes widened in surprise, and then I heard her excited voice from inside. Yes, he is here right now. Pause. No, I don't know that. I said I don't know. It only happened a couple of times. What's happening? I thought and answered myself with my next mental question. They found out where I was and knew that I was going to her. And they were probably already in town. Write down that phone line. I got into the car and drove away, wondering how they were able to figure everything out. A call from Whitney woke me up the next morning at 7:30. She was handed the documents, she said. In your apartment last night around 9. Not the day before? I asked. Last night, she repeated, at 9. Thank you, I said and hung up. The game has begun. It was almost 11. I had just returned from a break. The crowd was much the same as before, people jostling and sweating on the tiny dance floor, standing 3 deep at the bar. I played a few new songs compared to the previous show, but no one seemed to care. That's one of the benefits of being in a cover band for 5 years. You have hundreds of the sweetest pop hits of the last 50 years at your disposal to cover any situation. Whitney was there with her friend who I saw her with last time, and they were holding hands, looking at each other lovingly. He was a handsome man, 7 or 8 years older than her, with gray streaks in his short, cropped hair and eyes that noticed everything when they weren't looking at Whitney. It was obvious that he was not missing anything, and I guessed that he was a policeman. Rebecca sat with them and danced from time to time with one of those who offered her a hand. But these were light dances, full of fun, laughter, and lots of playful pirouettes and spins. Teddy brought his wife with him, and Nick Harlan and his wife later joined them. When I met Nick during the break, he only said that he had come to see who was scratching his guitar while he was away, and that he would now be taking away his Sundays indefinitely. I started the second part of the show at Whitney's request with the song, You've Got a Friend. It turns out that this was a song between them and their new lover. Slow numbers are best played in groups of 2 or 3, so I took off the capo and was about to start Change the World when I suddenly saw it to the right. It was sudden, as if one moment there was a group of visitors there, and the next it was just her, wearing a bright yellow blouse and light brown trousers with a nervous smile and eyes full of hope and apology. I put the capo back on, this time on the 5th fret, and started my song, looking at her the whole time. I wish you love and happiness. I guess I wish you all the best. I wish you wouldn't be like me and fall in love with someone like you. Because if you felt the way I do, you'd probably be walking around the block like a little kid. But children don't know, they only guess how difficult it is to wish you happiness. I sang the entire song without taking my eyes off her. Her eyes were wet by the time I got to the second verse, and she was shaking slightly when the song ended. As soon as the last chord died down, she turned and disappeared into the crowd, and I did not see her again for the rest of the evening. It was hard to concentrate, but somehow I managed to do it. I played until the very last bell, then lingered on stage, sorting out the equipment, until most had left. "What's happened?" Rebecca finally asked. "Sandy was here," I replied. Her eyes narrowed and a sly smile appeared on her face. "It's time." My God, I thought, I don't want to see her on the other side of any case against me, that's for sure. The next day, Nick Harlan quickly polished off the final rough edges of Sweet Marlene, my first attempt at fame and fortune. He also suggested speeding up the tempo, then played and sang it about twice as fast as I had imagined. "That's it," Teddy agreed. "Temp. I just didn't see her like that." I nodded, agreeing, but not really delving into it. I could barely concentrate on the next song we worked on, a slow, well-tempoed song about pain. They were both a little surprised when I suddenly began to disagree with their suggestions for changing the text, and instead made it more painful and caustic. They both agreed with the end result. The song became more emotional. Then they looked at me with knowing looks, especially Nick. "This sucks, right?" "Yes," I replied. "Just make sure you never have to go through this again." I just looked at him, amazed at how quickly he realized what was happening in my life. But his firm, intent gaze made it clear that he had been through this himself and knew what he was talking about. Without further ado, I focused and became more immersed in working together, listening carefully to their suggestions and seeing how they came to them. For some reason, it felt good just to know that I was with someone who had been through this too. When I finished my shift on Monday evening, I was greeted by Sandy again, just like I was on Saturday. At first, she was not there, and suddenly once, and she was already here. "What are you doing here, Sandy?" I asked. She froze, afraid to answer. I said, "I'm looking for you, Mark." I snorted mockingly. "Why? Am I interfering with your daddy's plans to become president?" She looked down for a few seconds and then looked back at me. "Yes, Mark," she said, trying to hold my gaze but failing. "You're ruining Daddy's plans, but that's not the reason I'm here." "So why are you here?" "To apologize." "Apology accepted. You can go now." "And to get you back," she added. I tried to hide my contempt, but judging by her flinch, I failed. "Is it true? Bring me back." She nodded, her lips moving as if trying to find words. "You have every right to hate me, Mark. I know that you. Your dad must be really worried about how this is going to look, right?" She sighed helplessly. "I know you think so, Mark, but you don't know the whole story." "That's where you're wrong, Sandy. I know the whole story. Of course, they didn't share their little plan with me before we got married. No, I didn't find out until a couple of months ago when I overheard your parents and mine discussing it when I got up to go to the bathroom one night. That weekend we spent at the governor's mansion. Do you remember this?" She nodded. Behind me, I felt someone put a hand on my shoulder and heard Ferlin's voice. "Why don't you two sit down in the dining room? I've already put her salad there, and this way you can discuss everything in private." "Of course, Ferlin," I said, still glaring at Sandy. I turned on my heel and walked to the far corner of the dimly lit dining room, away from the few customers who were sitting at other tables. From behind me, I heard Sandy say, "Sorry about all this." "It's not like you need to apologize to me," Ferlin replied. "Go back there and make sure Mark understands that you are truly sorry." She followed me to the corner of the dining room, but hesitated before sitting down. I'm sure she didn't expect me to be so angry about the whole situation, but I wasn't thrilled about having to deal with it unexpectedly either. My fingers tapped on the table, my right knee shook nervously, and I continued to look to my right out the window, looking at the half-empty parking lot outside. Sandy finally sat up and reached out her hand to take mine. But when her fingers touched my skin, I sharply pulled my hand away as if a snake had bitten it. "Just eat your salad, Sandy." She lowered her eyes. "I know that you don't believe me. Honestly, I wouldn't believe it myself. But I'm telling the truth. I want another chance. Not for Dad and his campaign, but for me. For us. That's all I want." I looked at her with contempt, my words dripping with venom. "Yes, you have such an amazing fucking reputation. Do you really want to come back and be truly married to me now? No more fake marriage, but a real one this time. Does this mean you won't cheat on me again, at least until we have our first child? Or are you just going to hope it comes from me?" She held back tears. No one had ever spoken to her in such a tone, and she tried her best not to break under my pressure. Several times she tried to clench her jaw in determination, but she couldn't. Instead, she stared at the lettuce and began fiddling with the lettuce leaves with her fingertips. "I thought you knew," she said almost in a whisper. "Knew what?" "That we marry only for the sake of our parents. That it wasn't meant to be serious. I thought they told you." "Well, they didn't tell me anything, okay? Now I know it. My mom decided to share this little detail with me just a few weeks ago." I leaned across the table, my eyes burning, and my voice became insistent. "You couldn't have guessed? Did you think I was just playing this little game?" She bit her lip, her lips again trying to form words to respond without making my anger worse. Then, taking a deep breath, she seemed to decide that the truth was the only way, not the best plan. "My friends and I laughed at you behind your back," she whispered. "You were always so sweet, loving, and caring that we called you Puppy. I just thought. We all thought you were trying to win me over for real. Tried to, I don't know, make me really love you and be a real wife." This phrase made me angry. I felt my face turn into a mask of rage and tried to speak quietly so that other visitors would not hear our conversation. "Were you laughing at me because I was trying to be the best husband I could? Did you laugh at me because I tried to make you love me? God, Sandy, I thought you loved me already. That's why I did it. I thought that I was the happiest person in the world. And you all laughed at me? Did you think I was pathetic?" She could no longer hold back her tears. "Now I understand. Do you see? Now I know what you were trying to do. And I feel really fucking bad about it. I feel. To hell with your feelings. You treated me like a roommate for 6 years. Probably cheated on me whenever you wanted, with whoever you wanted. You and your friends laughed at me, humiliated me, God knows what else they did. And now you think I'll just say, 'Oh, you're right. It was an honest misunderstanding. I'm over it. Let's get married for real now, because I can definitely trust you after all this.' Do you think this is how it will be?" Sandy dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, trying to hold back her sobs, and I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms. The anger subsided, giving way to amazement. Her next words took me by surprise. "After about a year and a half or two, I sat down and thought about it. Not just once, Mark, but for several months in a row. I watched you and how you treated me, how happy you were, and do you know what I noticed? That I was a little strange." She shook her head. "No, I noticed that I was happy too. I really enjoyed being with you. I couldn't wait until the evening to come home and just snuggle with you, watch TV, or listen to you play guitar on the porch. I thought you did all this to make it real, but I didn't care anymore. You made our marriage real, Mark. I realized that I fell in love with you, that I was happier than I had ever been in my life. And when they made their sarcastic comments afterwards, I told them to go to hell. That you were incredible, and that our marriage is real, and that we are truly in love." "Why did it take so long?" I said, leaning across the table towards her again. "And why did you cheat on me?" "You don't. When I was working hard at work and at home trying to free an innocent man from prison, why did you find someone else?" "Let me explain," she said with increasing frustration in her voice. "Try to explain," I said, lowering my voice. Some of the visitors cast confused glances in our direction, but I could only answer them with a weak smile. "Okay," she said, trying to control her voice. "You have to remember, Mark, that I thought you were as aware of everything as I am. They told you the same thing. Play this, and if in a couple of years after the election you want to move on and find true love, please go ahead. We'll explain it somehow." I was sure you knew. But I never did anything to make you think I was going to leave, Sandy. Never. That's not true, Mark. Everything that was happening at that time made me think that you were going to leave, that you found someone else. Nonsense. Put yourself in my shoes, Mark. You are me, and suddenly, after 3 years of working at the same law firm, you start coming home at 10 at night. You start working on weekends, 10 hours a day. You stop spending time with me and— But you knew what was going on, I interrupted. I've told you this more than once. No, I only knew what you told me. I didn't know this was true. But there was more to it than just that. You have withdrawn into yourself. You used to have big things too, but you hardly told me about it. He just said that you were working to correct the mistake, to free the innocent. But nothing more. Not how your day is going, not how you feel, nothing. But I'm a lawyer, I objected. This is all confidential, you know that. That didn't stop you from discussing matters in general before, did it? I thought about it, remembering those times. She was right. I was so fucking scared that I was going to screw it all up, and that Nap Bonnaroo was going to die in prison because I wasn't good enough that I kept to myself. And our sex life has almost disappeared, Mark. What would you think if suddenly, out of the blue, what we had 5 or 6 times a week came down to barely once a week because I wasn't in the mood? And even when I was ready, it was more like quick and to the point. Think about all this. If you were me, wouldn't you think that I was cheating on you? And if you knew about our prenuptial agreement, wouldn't you think that I may have found someone else and am getting ready to leave? But I explained everything to you. I continued to argue. I even tried to cut down on work. That Sunday, I said I would come home, but you. You said you'd be back in an hour or two, Mark. I waited until 2-something, got tired of you ignoring me, and left. I went out for dinner and drinks with a guy I worked with who had been trying to woo me since day one. Yes, it turned into an intimate relationship. In the last month, when you were still closed from me and did not talk to me, I finally accepted the fact that I would have to find someone else. We slept together maybe 5 or 6 times, and while that was bad enough, it never happened again after that, neither before nor after. But you never talked to me about this, I said, feeling her words pulling me into the abyss. You never asked me directly. Tears were streaming down her cheeks, but there was still desperation in her voice. She tried her best to make me understand, and her determination only grew stronger. You're still seeing it through your own lens, Mark. You need to look at it from my point of view, the way I saw it. I was in an arranged marriage that I thought should have ended by now. You were aware of everything. Well, at least that's what I thought. I joked about it all the time, remember? I didn't understand these jokes then, I said. Now I understand. Yes, but you played along with them as if you understood. And now I see you moving away. Not a little, but completely. You don't spend time with me. You don't talk to me. You don't share your thoughts with me. Every time we are together, you are in your own world, almost not noticing me. Sex almost disappears. All intimacy disappeared for several months. What would you think? I thought about it, but kept coming back to the same question. I said, but if you were really happy, why didn't you say anything? If you thought I was leaving, why didn't you talk to me? Because I knew there was an agreement between us from the very beginning, and I thought you knew it too. I thought you were just going to throw it in my face and tell me I needed to grow up. I closed my eyes, trying to comprehend it all. Sandy's soft voice interrupted my thoughts and destroyed all my constructions. When I finally saw that press conference, I realized that you were not moving away from me, that you were not making a new life for yourself. I realized it when his mom hugged you, and you looked so sad and so relieved at the same time. I saw it on your face. It was like the weight of the world had finally lifted off your shoulders, but from what you said earlier, I realized that we still had problems that were bothering you. And then I realized that I had made the biggest mistake of my life, and I vowed to make amends, to do everything to save our marriage, regardless of what we initially agreed to. I looked at her, trying to figure out what to say. Sandy wiped the tears from her cheeks with the back of her hand, smearing some mascara. She must have seen the confusion on my face and smiled slightly, but it was not a joyful smile. Instead, she was tinged with sadness and embarrassment, her eyes sparkling with slight nostalgia. Those 3 years after that were the happiest years of our marriage, weren't they? I thought for a moment and then said, yes, everything was good, but those years were truly the best. Because I promised myself that I would change everything. I was determined as hell to do what I thought you did for me. I was going to be a puppy and make you love me so much you'd never leave. Well, I began, but she was interrupted by another stream of tears and sobs. And then, just when I was sure that we would be together forever the moment you finally asked if we could have a baby, and I realized that you would never leave you left, Mark. You just disappeared. At this point, she burst into sobs, unable to hold back her tears any longer. I tried to console her, feeling the eyes of everyone present in the hall on me, but I couldn't. Then, with one last sob, she pushed back her chair and ran out. I was too stunned to move or react until I heard heavy footsteps approaching the table. It doesn't seem like things went smoothly for you, Ferland said, sounding as sad as I felt. But he didn't look all that confused. They were both sitting in my apartment this time. We sat on the floor, ate hot sandwiches with cheese, bacon, tomatoes, and spinach, and washed down large mugs of tomato soup. Grilled cheese with tomato soup is a childhood favorite of mine, slightly updated. But I couldn't feel any warmth or comfort as I ate and listened to Whitney and Rebecca think out loud that I wasn't even there. This really makes a difference, Whitney said in a soft voice. I mean, I can understand her point of view. If only you believe her, Rebecca replied sharply. But it's all logical, right? Well, if she didn't love him, she could just leave. Or continue dating the guy she was having an affair with, just being more careful. But he said they were happier at the end than at the beginning. And what can you say about her reaction when he started talking about children? How do you explain this? Hell, I don't know, Rebecca said. Biological clock, maybe. Don't think. Her explanation is the simplest and most logical. It was then that she finally realized that he was not going to leave her. This was the moment when their arrangement finally turned into a real marriage. Yes, but it's all still based on lies. This whole story. And she was part of it. Think about it. If she really thought he was aware, would she just make snide comments every now and then? Would you never bring this to light? Exactly, Whitney agreed. It's a bit of a stretch. I mean, I can imagine how this could come up in an argument or something. Has this ever happened, Mark? What? I said, listening but not quite understanding them. Have you ever quarreled? Were they yelling at each other and saying all sorts of nasty things to each other? I shrugged. Of course. Doesn't this happen to everyone? And she never reminded you of these agreements? Never said it directly? Well, I thought. No, I think not. I mean, yeah, there were moments where she would just scream things like, I don't know why I even agreed to marry you, but it wasn't anything serious. You see, Whitney said, I can imagine such a development of events, especially if she thought he knew about it from the beginning. Nonsense, Rebecca retorted confidently. So what do you think? Whitney asked me. Don't know. I think I believe her, but I'm not sure it makes a difference. So you believe her? Rebecca asked, taken aback by my seemingly naivety. Yes, I believe it. You weren't there, Beck. She was completely broken. I can't imagine anyone playing that well. But she lied to you all these years you were together. She didn't play then. She was just being herself, Sandy. At first, she was just trying to make the best of a bad situation, and then she really tried to save our marriage. So yes, I believe her. It all matches. Yes, but You didn't see her face when she talked about our parents, I interrupted. She wasn't even angry. Not yet. She was still trying to wrap her head around it, like she couldn't believe they never told me. Rebecca snorted, and I pushed my plate aside, and Whitney put her hand on mine. I think you should meet her again. Talk about everything. Divorce is still an option if you want it. And you should go for it, Rebecca insisted. But, Whitney continued, throwing an exasperated glance at Rebecca, you don't want to look back in 10 years and think, what if? What if she was serious? What if your dream woman really loved you, wanted to have children with you and grow old with you? And what? What if she cheats on you again and you just put up with it? Rebecca interjected. What if you keep playing their games, all their games, and they win? They will all get what they want. Daddy Trulson will be president, and your father will be majority leader. What will you get, Mark? I stood up and left, leaving them sitting there, almost running to my bedroom and closing the door behind me. I needed to be alone and think things through. I lay down on the bed and began to think. Whitney was right. All three of us are lawyers, and we intuitively understood how we all thought. Law school does this to you. It distorts your thoughts. However, we were taught a cardinal principle in our first year of criminal law. Actions without the necessary intent are just actions. If you're on a roof and you trip and knock over a brick that falls and kills someone, that's not murder. It's an accident. If you're on the same roof, you see people below, and you deliberately push a brick, it's at least manslaughter, but more likely second-degree murder. If you see someone you know and deliberately push a brick on them, that's premeditated murder. In each of the three scenarios, you drop a brick and kill someone, but the outcome depends on your intentions. But Rebecca was right too. Willfully ignoring the facts is no excuse. If you push a brick without knowing if there is someone below, it still falls into the second category, manslaughter, at the very least. So the question was whether Sandy was intentionally turning a blind eye. Did she guess what I didn't know? Should she have said something sooner? Would I play differently if I were in her place? This last question was especially difficult because I would have to imagine myself in the shoes of someone as incredibly popular as her being thrust upon me. There was a quiet knock on the door. "Can I come in?" Rebecca asked, opening the door slightly and peeking out from behind it. I looked at her, and she hesitated before walking in and closing the door behind her. She walked over to the bed and sat next to me, placing her hand on my thigh. "Sorry," she said. "I want her to be a bitch because you don't deserve any of this, you know. You don't need. Need to. I told you that first night that I don't usually sleep with married men, and so I allowed myself to start falling in love with one, and it's not fair to you, especially now." I sat down and leaned against the wall, looking at her. "Why have you never been married?" She smiled sadly. "I'm not the type to get married, Mark. Trust me, if you are now thinking of leaving her for me, we will never get married." "Why?" She made a distant expression on her face. Her eyes were directed at me, but did not see. "Each of us has our own story, your own burdens, its weirdness, and all this nonsense. Some people can handle it, some can't. I don't think I can. I wish I could tell you that maybe you are the person to help me get through this, but I really don't know, and it wouldn't be fair of me if I said otherwise." I nodded and put my hand on hers. I didn't know what to say. "I guess what I'm trying to say is you don't have to think about it right now. Definitely not about us, but not about what Sandy said either. You need to think about what you want. You, Mark. Not Sandy, not your parents, not anyone else, just you. You need to do something for yourself for the first time in a long time. And when you understand what you want, then you will need to talk to Sandy and maybe see if she has a place in your plans." I thought about it. She was right. It all came down to what they had both said before. It was time to be proactive and take control of your life. I thought I was in control of my life all this time, but I wasn't. Now I needed to really take control and get what I wanted out of life. "Will we see each other again?" I asked. She smiled and replied, "Of course we will." I leaned over and kissed her. It was more than a brotherly kiss, but less than a romantic one. He was nice, and she pressed herself against me, as if realizing that this might be our last kiss. I rested my cheek on her thick brown hair and stroked her shoulder, enjoying the moment free from the thoughts that had been tormenting me all evening. It felt good, and I wondered if I would ever experience that feeling again. Just when I thought I had enough problems in my upside-down life, the door to the hitching rail opened at 11:15 the next morning, and my parents walked in with looks of anger and determination on their faces. "Hey, Mom and Dad," I called cheerfully, then turned to my bulky boss next to me. "Ferlin, meet my parents, Senator and Mrs. Roberts. Mom, Dad, this is my boss, Ferlin." "Nice to meet you," Ferlin grumbled, clearly unimpressed. He turned around and headed back to the kitchen. "He's not your damn boss," his father hissed. "Jim Parker is your boss." "What are you doing, Mark?" Mom asked. "I'm working," I answered. "Now I'm a bartender." "What the hell kind of stupid game are you playing?" continued the father. "You just quit without warning, then left Sandy and disappeared, coming to this. To this. To this God-forsaken village. What's on your mind?" "Enough already, Dad. You know perfectly well why I'm here. Do you think it's just a coincidence that I ended up in the same damn town as Clarice Talbot? Do you think I just chose this small town by chance?" Dad's jaw dropped and Mom gasped, her eyes widening like big saucers. "You didn't know she was here?" I said, smiling. "She and your son? The same brother you never told me about?" They looked at each other, then looked at me. Then the father sank down, and the mother leaned against the bar counter to avoid falling. "What have you done?" asked the father. "I was trying to find the truth," I answered sharply. "For the first time in my damn life, I tried to find the truth about you all. And don't tell me you didn't know she was here. Someone met her and scared her. She's too damn scared to even look at me." "Pat Trulson's people found you," he said, his thoughts spinning, his eyes glazed over. "We had people make cautious inquiries, but it was his people who found you." He didn't tell me how. "Tell me you haven't met her," my mother said anxiously, sitting down and looking at me. "Why? Are you afraid that I will ruin your holiday?" "It's not what you think, Mark," my father said, his voice sadder than I'd ever heard it. He looked depressed and muttered, "God, not again." I looked at them both in turn. Here we go again, I thought. This is much worse than just finding out about a brother I never knew about. Then my anger returned, and I felt almost joy at their sudden despair. "Why the hell do you even care what I think? After what you did to me, to my life, you think that now I don't give a damn about all your—" "How dare you talk to us like that?" said the father, slamming his hand on the bar counter. "I don't know what's going on here, but I won't tolerate it." "You will tolerate everything I tell you," I answered. "Just like I put up with when you two sold me out for your own damn purposes." "What are you talking about, dear?" Mom asked, her eyes narrowed as she tried to figure out how much I knew. "You know perfectly well what I'm talking about, dear Mommy. About my marriage. About how you, Dad, Pat, and Deborah arranged everything so that Pat Trulson would get support before the election. I don't know what exactly you received in return, but I'm sure the debt was more than repaid." "What are you talking about?" asked the father, but his face could not hide that he knew what was being said. "Stop it. That weekend at the governor's residence, I overheard everything. You and the Trulsons were talking downstairs about how you convinced Sandy to marry me and stay married for a couple of years while you fooled me and encouraged me to follow my dreams. I heard everything, Dad, and even how you both laughed at how gullible your own son turned out to be." The father's face twitched, and the mother looked indignant. "What difference does it make how we arrange it? We gave you your dream. Tell me, haven't you been happy all this time? Tell me what we did. You arranged a marriage for me that she could leave at any time after a year or two. You told her that, right? What difference does it make what we told her?" she answered sharply, without giving an inch. "She didn't leave, right? You're still together, right? Does it matter how it all started? The main thing is that you were married to the girl of your dreams, and you were happy as a pig in the mud. This is important, Mom, especially now that I know everything. Now it matters more than ever." "Why?" Why is this important now that you know? She still wants to be married. Deborah told us that Sandy doesn't want a divorce. She wants to stay with you forever. I'll tell you why this is important, I said, remembering my conversation with Whitney under the stars the night before. This is important because now I doubt everything about my marriage. My memories are now distorted. Do you remember the first time you and Dad met and how excited you were? Dad nodded slightly, but Mom just grimaced. But I don't think so anymore. When I think back to when Sandy and I started dating, all I see is how I was fooled. Every second we were together, I thought she was happy and in love with me. And now I know that behind my back she laughed at me. How does it feel, Mom? Do you want to exchange memories? Her face remained a mask of rage and determination, but I noticed how my father began to shrink. Sorry, Mark. I didn't think, he began. You didn't think so, Dad? Didn't think I'd ever find out? Or didn't you think that I wouldn't care about what you did to me? What exactly were you not thinking about? He looked at me with a sad expression. I didn't think about any of this, especially about you. I got caught up in it all and didn't think much. I looked from him to my mother, who just snorted. Grow up, boys. The world is cruel. If you want something, be ready to take it no matter what. I just looked at her, not believing my ears. There was not the slightest regret or apology in her voice. On the contrary, she was victorious, as if she were explaining to naive children how the world works. When did this happen? When did my mom turn into this evil bitch? I asked, stunned. Don't you dare, she growled, leaning over the bar. Go away, Ferlin thundered behind them. Mom froze and Dad turned around in shock. Right now, he roared. Get out of my establishment and don't come back, do you hear? Now. Mom turned to him with an evil grin and said, Don't you dare. I said right now, damn it, he shouted, taking a step towards her. She looked at him, then turned to me and said, This is not the end, Mark. Don't hope. With a final evil smile towards Ferlin, who did not take his furious gaze from her, she proudly raised her shoulders and walked out the door. Father looked at Ferlin, then at me and back at Ferlin. Sorry about all this. Ferlin just gave him a stern look. With one last sad look in my direction, my father sank even more and left. The lunch break and subsequent cleaning passed in a fog of confused thoughts and confused orders. Ferlin was silent. At first, Debbie just fluttered around cheerfully, correcting my mistakes, changing plates and drinks in places as needed. After a while, she stopped even allowing me to deliver lunch orders to those sitting at the bar. She simply took orders and delivered them herself. I was worse than useless, I was in the way. But Debbie didn't say a word. She just continued in the same cheerful rhythm, patting me on the back and giggling every now and then. At 15 minutes to 3, there was no one left in the bar, and Ferlin sank heavily onto the bar stool. This explains a lot. What? I asked, absent-mindedly rearranging the glasses on the shelf. Last evening with that woman. Sandy, right? Your wife. And in general, how have you been acting since you came here? This caught my attention. What do you mean, the way I've been acting since I arrived? I mean, you're not from here. You don't fit in. Here, behind the bar. Jesus, Mark, you are smart as a whip, sociable. Getting dressed. What did you do before? I was a lawyer. He chuckled. Explains your attraction to women, I suppose. Although you don't seem like it at all. Why? Too eager to please. Most lawyers are super alphas. They don't care about anyone but themselves. And you are the opposite. It's as if all you think about is how to please everyone around you so that they will love you. Ready to go out of your way to do things for people that they don't even expect from you, just so that they love you. And is that bad? Your mother was at least partially right about one thing, Mark. You need to take care of yourself, not anyone else. You should be happy on your own. I don't know how to explain it. I think you just need to stop trying so damn hard to please everyone so they will love you. They'll either like you or they won't, but that doesn't mean you have to please them from head to toe, okay? But I began, but fell silent, leaving this thought unfinished. He was right, and I understood why. I was still in Stevie's shadow. He didn't have to try to be loved. He just assumed that everyone would love him. Even so, he still had his detractors. It is impossible to please everyone always and everywhere. But, Ferlin said after a minute, I think you have a couple of things you need to do. Like what? He hesitated, then looked at me, unsure whether to speak. Finally, taking a deep breath, relaxing his massive body, he said, I think you need to talk to your father. Not with my mother. She's already lost. But your father, he's really suffering right now, and you should talk to him. If for nothing else, then at least to find out more about this brother you think you have, and who they are trying so hard to keep you away from. I nodded. Yes, I realized that too at the end. I don't know him. Shame, maybe. Disappointment, Ferlin suggested. I think both in himself and in who he perhaps considers himself to have become. It was more than just shame. He looked broken when he left here. And the second? I asked. Second, what do you think I need to do? He rose heavily from his chair and placed his hand on the bar counter. You need to have a serious talk with your woman. I sighed as if all my strength had gone out of me, and I was about to melt into a puddle of mark right in the middle of the bar. I heard something last night. I tried to stay away, but I still heard snippets. And I also heard much of what was said today. And I think you've misunderstood something, or maybe haven't thought about it enough yet to decide whether it matters. I replayed the conversations in my head, trying to understand something, but in the end, I didn't remember anything. Help me, I said. You told your parents that all your memories were lies, Mark, but that's not true. Not all of them. I heard your wife tell you that she has dedicated the last 3 years to making you happy. She tried, or so she says, to make you love her so much that you never want to leave. So maybe the memories of the early years are distorted, but those are not, right? The ones at the end. I hesitated, then nodded. Exactly, he continued. So now I think you need to ask yourself whether these memories are good and real, and whether they are worth building a future on, or whether too much has happened to continue. I leaned back, leaning on the refrigerator behind me, and looked at the floor. After a minute, I muttered, Would you like to share your thoughts on this matter? His voice became low and a little hoarse. I told you that now everything depends on you. This is your decision, and only you can make it. I'd like to help you with it, but I won't. I looked at him and tried to smile. Thank you. You're welcome, he replied, turned around to leave, but suddenly stopped and turned to me again. To be honest, I would have sent you to deal with all this by now. God knows you're worse than useless here today, but maybe you should take a little time to really think about it before you go talk to them again, you know? Yes, I said, returning to work with a new sense of purpose, and with an overwhelming amount of new thoughts and dilemmas. When I finished at 6, I asked Ferlin for the next day off. He just muttered something in response. I took that as a yes. I sat on the tiny patio outside my dining room door, playing my guitar in the cool autumn darkness. My mind was lost in thought as the fingers of my left hand formed chords, and the fingers of my right played random melodies. Can you do me a favor? I heard a voice from the shadows to the right. How did you find me? I asked. Your address was on the divorce papers, she said, walking out into the dim light cast by my street lamp. She looked hesitant and anxious, as if she was afraid to come closer. I see, I replied, continuing to pluck the strings and looking at her. I hardly noticed it last night, but now she looked absolutely terrible. Her hair was styled, but just barely, and her jeans, always tight-fitting, seemed loose and baggy. Are you eating anything? I asked. Of course, she answered, but there was no confidence in her voice. She bit her lip, trying to figure out what to do with her hands until she finally shoved them into her pockets, causing her shoulders to clench and her to look hunched and anxious. It's getting cold here, she tried to start a conversation, then tried to smile. It's still pretty warm in Memphis. To him. She nervously fiddled with something. Indecision was written on her face. Sorry about last night, she said. I shrugged and started playing an arrangement of the old Cat Stevens song, Moonshadow. There was something almost mystical about her that suited my mood and this surreal situation. Whatever it was, it calmed me down. You said you wanted to ask for a favor. She hesitated, then said, "Will you play something for me?" "What exactly?" "Calico Skies," she said, which was predictable. This song has always been ours. Sweet and bitter at the same time, beautiful and sad when you know why it was written. "Why don't you sit down?" I suggested, nodding towards the old, shabby chair next to me. "Okay." She didn't move, and then, as if she'd made up her mind, she took a long step and slid into the chair, like she was afraid I might hit her or something. "How did we get to this point, Sandy?" I asked. The fingers of my left hand were already warming up for the chords of our song. "I used to think it was blind luck," she replied, looking at the dark clouds that were eclipsing the moon as they slowly approached us. "I mean, we got married to help our parents, and then you tried to make me love you, and bam, just when I thought you'd stop trying, I realized you weren't, so I decided to try to make you love me even more. And then I felt like I found a diamond in a pile of manure, you know." "So I was originally a pile of dung?" I asked softly. She looked at me, trying to figure out what mood I was in. I just looked at her, waiting for an answer. "You were never dung, Mark. It just didn't start out the way it should have. On the other hand, I keep repeating to myself that if it hadn't started like this, it probably wouldn't have started at all. Because I wasn't your type, right?" I said. She nodded, biting her lip again, her voice as quiet as the breeze. "But you became my type, the only one I'll ever need." I nodded. "How did this happen? Was it out of guilt, or were you just afraid to look for someone else?" She looked down, her face wrinkled in intense thought. "At first it was satisfying. Not some wild madness, passion. Don't get me wrong, we had those moments, but it wasn't like the movies. But after some time it became like a movie, at least for me." "It's always been like a movie for me," I said. "Or like in a fairy tale, maybe. I don't know, but it was always real for me." She didn't seem to hear me. She continued, looking at the clouds. Her face seemed to be somewhere far away. "I remember exactly when it happened. They made fun of you, Peggy and Tracy and the rest, because you were always so polite, eager to please, and, well, I don't know how you always went out of your way to make me happy. And I compared you to their husbands and their lives. Their husbands were like Stevie. Everyone is so macho, swaggering, one of those guys for whom dinner has to be ready when they get home. And to hell with the fact that they have plans for Sunday, they have football with friends. And I couldn't understand how I could envy them at all." I saw tears in her eyes, sparkling against the black night sky, and a smile touched her lips. Her thoughts became words, and she spoke as if to herself, remembering all this. "And then there was this damn appeal process, and I hated it. I hated this thing, and I hated you, and I thought you would turn into one of them. One of those husbands like theirs, and I didn't like it. Hell, you didn't even tell me about the case for 3 weeks, and by then I already decided that you had someone. I thought you had met another woman and were getting ready to leave. And then when you said it was a big deal, I thought you were just going to tell me, 'Screw you, figure it out yourself,' and make me leave. As if you yourself couldn't leave me, but you wanted me to do it, and you pushed me to do it. And I hated myself for all these thoughts, because I had to admit that by that time I had already fallen in love with you and really wanted us to work out. If I didn't truly love you, I wouldn't care if you tried to push me away. But I fell in love when I shouldn't have, and because of this, I hated myself and everyone around me. I didn't play the guitar anymore. I was mesmerized by a side of Sandy that she had never revealed before." She was silent for a moment, then laughed sadly. "It's funny, but I understood everything the moment I saw you on TV. This should have been your proudest moment, but you just looked exhausted and broken. You weren't the one who wanted to leave, but the one who was afraid that I would leave. And I remember that shame. He was stunning. I was in my office when this episode aired, and there were a whole bunch of people around me looking at you and patting me on the back and telling me how lucky I must be. But all I saw was your look as you were all being hugged, and this tiny woman almost strangled you. You looked lost and scared. I just collapsed. It was like a hammer blow. I've never felt this way before, even when Stevie died. And then I rushed home to support you, but you didn't come. I sat and sat, praying that God would bring you home so I could have another chance. What about your boyfriend? I asked. She shook her head. We just had lunch, mostly. Well, in the last month, maybe 4 or 5 times we went to his apartment after dinner. But as soon as I saw you on the screen, as soon as I realized that you weren't trying to get away from me, I never spoke to him again. He quickly understood and didn't insist anymore. I never cheated on you, I muttered. I know, she whispered. After a moment, she turned to me, trying to keep her face from bursting into tears again. I lied yesterday, Mark. How is this? I suspected it then. I suspected you didn't know anything. I wasn't sure, but I suspected. Why didn't you say anything? Because I was afraid that if I told him, I would have to confess everything. And I was afraid that if I did this, you would leave me. I didn't want this. Then and never. I wanted us to have a chance to make things right. Just pretend nothing happened so we can go back to the way things were before this damn appeal case. So for you, our marriage was already real. She smiled, remembering, and nodded. Yes, I swear to God I tried my best. Not for myself, but for you. For us. I swear. Her words made me sad again. It's sad because of what happened and how we got to what I thought was reality for a long time. Say you'll give me a chance, Mark. I beg you. I will do whatever you want, accept any conditions. Just come back. That won't happen, I said. Not now, not ever. Her reaction was immediate. She covered her face with her hands and began to cry, her shoulders shaking with sobs. I reached out, took her hands away from her face, and said, I'm not saying we'll get back together, but if we do, I'll never go back to Memphis, even to visit. And I won't return home either. I'm not going to help your dad with his damn campaign, and I'm not going to Tennessee again. What do you mean by this? She hastily wiped away her tears, her eyes begging me to give her hope. I'm still thinking Sandy. But first, you need to think carefully about what I said, because I'm serious about having a heart attack, okay? She nodded. No more Tennessee. And to hell with our parents, I repeated. Every single one of them. They treated me as badly as you can treat a person. Betrayed, deceived, used, and thrown away. I don't care who they are. I don't want to waste my time on these people. You should think about this, Sandy. Seriously think about it. If I decide to give us another chance, you'll have to move here, to this area, and I will probably remain a bartender, and I will definitely play at concerts again. Through the tears, a smile appeared on her face. Groping fans? Groping fans. But not really, right? I shook my head. Of course, not really. But I want to start living for myself for once. Or at least do some of the things I've always wanted to do instead of doing what my parents demanded or pushed me into. And you're still not sure about us because I'm one of those things they got you into, right? She asked, her smile becoming uncertain. Wrong. I'm still trying to decide what to do with us, whether to try again, remembering how happy we were the last 3 years when you finally invested in our marriage and made it real, no matter how it all started. But you're not sure that these last 3 years can outweigh everything else, she guessed, as well as treason. Yes, I said, sinking back into the chair and just looking at her. She also just looked at me, then reached out her hand and squeezed mine. I squeezed her hand back. A minute later, she asked, will you at least play me that sentimental song? I didn't immediately let go of her hand, but then I started strumming the chords. It was written that I would love you from the moment I opened my eyes, and the morning when I first saw Yao gave me life under Calico skies. I will hold you for as long as you like, I'll hold you for the rest of my life. I was destined to love you from the moment I opened my eyes, and the morning I first saw you gave me life under a calico sky. I will hold you as long as you want, I will hold you for the rest of my life. Finding my father's phone number was easy. Just call his Senate office and find out where he's staying. It was more difficult to talk to my father because my mother answered the phone. Yes, she said sharply. I would like to talk to my father. After how you treated us yesterday, after you let this man treats us like this in public, you think. Call him, or I'll hang up. You don't dare make threats and demands. I'm your mother, Mark Roberts, not some redneck." I heard my father say something in the background and her irritated hiss in response, but it was all muffled. "Mark," the father said into the phone while the mother continued to swear in the background. "Mark, are you in touch?" "Breakfast in an hour," I said. "Only you. I repeat, don't you dare take her with you, understand?" "Where?" he asked. I told him the name and approximate location of a small eatery on the highway on the southern outskirts of the city. When we hung up, Momsh was still yelling at him in the background. I was 10 minutes late and Dad was pouring himself some coffee when I spotted him in the corner booth and headed there. He seemed to be riding hard and getting wet every day of his 59 years, and then some of the wrinkles on his face deepened and the skin pulled down. Bags under the eyes, glassy eyes, and general weakness completed the picture. "Thank you," he said as I slid into the booth across from him, "for calling me, wanting to meet me." "I don't know," I said matter-of-factly. "If I could think of another way to find out the truth about Clarice Talbot, I would, but I can't. So let's listen." He flinched at the mention of her name, then relented when I gestured and accepted a cup of coffee from a wizened old waitress with blue hair in a bun. "The little boy is not your brother," Dad said. "He's your nephew. He's Stevie's son." "Yes, that's right. Because she was Stevie's secretary, right?" It was Dad's turn to be lost in thought, and the lines on his face and around his eyes told me these were morbid thoughts. We had a break and Stevie had just returned from school. Clarice Talbot was my personal secretary. Great girl. Bright, lively, worked from dusk to dawn, and then some. I had a lot of stops to make on the campaign trail. Do you remember? I was running for re-election, and it was busy as hell. I nodded. When he hesitated, I said, "I remember. Keep telling the story." "Sorry," he muttered, then took a sip of water before continuing. "Anyway, we were in Chattanooga, a whole series of weekend rallies and everything. I got back to the hotel late, chatting and stuff with the local bigwigs, putting pressure on the flesh. When I got back there, it was about midnight, and I didn't think much of it that Stevie wasn't there and everything. We shared a room and Clarice lived with one of the PR people. I don't remember her name." "And it all matters. Why?" I said. "Will you get to the point?" But I couldn't talk him out of it. His eyes took on a faraway look that told me this had something to do with Stevie's death, and a chill ran down my spine. I didn't notice him at first. I just saw the beds, and they were both empty. I thought he was just somewhere in a club, kicking shoes or something. But then I heard this whimpering sound in the corner. I turned on the light, and there she was, cowering and trying to hide in the corner on the other side of the bed. Her clothes were all in tatters, and she was naked. She was furious and completely scared. I don't know how. I mean, how can you even think that about your own son? "Stevie had sex with her against her will," I said, putting into words what Dad couldn't. His eyes found me, and after a moment's hesitation, he said, "Yes, I don't know what he was thinking. God, if he had been in that room when I showed up, if he had been there, I would have killed him with my bare hands." What happened next? Her lips trembled as she struggled to control herself. I called the PR lady in the room down the hall. I took her there immediately. For Clarice, right? I mean, what else was I going to do? "How about calling the police?" I said. He smiled, a smile at first bitter, but then tender. "Of course, Mark. That's exactly what you would do. I know this is true, and I should have done this too, but I didn't. I was listening to this other woman, and her mind just started bubbling out ideas and instructions and scripts. I've seen it all. My Senate career is full of scandal. All this. Have you seen Clarice Talbot?" "Of course I saw her," he hissed, trying to speak more quietly. "You think I'm such a big monster." "The jury is out," I replied, and then took a sip of my coffee. What happened next? She dressed Clarice while I tried to call someone who could see the poor girl. Just when I was about to give up hope, there was a knock on the door. It was the police, and they were there to tell me that Stevie had wrapped his car around an old oak tree in the hills around Lookout Mountain. So you buried it all, I said. You bribed her and everything. He shook his head up and down. What good would it do otherwise? What about justice for Clarice Talbot? Would going public with all this, and you know damn well her name would be mentioned publicly and be the subject of all sorts of dirty gossip, would it really serve her well? Do you mean this type of justice? Mom was right, Mark. Sometimes you really can be such a damn Boy Scout. You say it like it's something embarrassing. Like I'm a failure because I want to do the right thing, Dad. Is it really that bad? He lowered his head and muttered, No. So when did you find out you were pregnant? And why did she decide to give birth? 3 months later. At first, she just thought it was nerves from that night. However, later, when her belly grew, she was, well, about 3 months or so. And how did you find out? Did she call you? I visited her a couple of times a week. See how she feels, see if she needs anything. I kept her on my payroll, but I was worried about her. He pointed to another cup of coffee and, once it was poured, continued. Anyway, one day I came and she said she was pregnant. I couldn't believe it. I didn't want to believe it. In any case, she said that she would not give up the child. If anything, it only made things worse for her because I'm pretty sure her parents almost disowned her because of it. So you decided to step in and help, right? I told her she would remain on the payroll until the baby was born. After that, we'll figure out how to give her some money to support her and get her a job. And she said, actually, not that much. I think she just wanted to get away from us. From all of us, but especially from me. And the boy. I don't even know his name, Dad admitted. Her only contact is a postcard whenever she changes her address, and we send her a check once a month, like clockwork. His name is Schuyler, I said, looking at my father. Your grandson's name is Schuyler, he plays football, he's healthy, and he looks just like me at that age. I think he took your side of the family. Stevie took his mom's side, but your genes must have rubbed off on you. Dad looked at it strangely, as if he was trying to imagine a little boy. Schuyler, he said. Schuyler. And Schuyler lives about a mile away in a shitty little house with a mother who, from what I've seen, still isn't very good at her job. And now she's scared shitless because someone showed up at her door and said something to her and showed her a picture of me. So now I can't even meet her and meet my nephew if she lets me. And it's not like I can blame her if she doesn't, because she'd be more than justified in comparing me to the other two Roberts men who went a long way toward ruining her whole life, don't you think? But they were Pat's people, Dad said. I didn't. I don't want to hear your damn excuses, Dad, I said. I want to hear what you're going to do about it, and I want to hear it right now. He looked at me, and a look of determination appeared on his face. He stood up, drank the rest of his coffee, and said, I'm going to take a leak, and then you take me to her, okay? Clarice Talbot was not at home when we arrived. At Dad's insistence, we waited in the car for her to return. 2 hours later, I suggested lunch, but he didn't hear anything. By 2:30, I had to take a leak. He told me to go out and pee behind a tree. He wasn't going anywhere. At 10 minutes to 2, she drove up to the house and got out of the car. Before she could reach the front door, Dad got out of the car and shouted, Clarice, wait a minute. She froze and then slowly turned to face him. I ran after my father as he crossed the street, crossed her lawn, and walked up to the porch, looking up at her. Senator, she said, visibly shaken. Clarice, calm down. I don't know what they told you, but you don't have any problems, okay? Her nod indicated that she didn't believe him. Dad looked around the house, then turned back to Clarice and said, Do you mind if we come in for a minute? I think it's time for Mark to go to the toilet. She looked at me, back at Dad, and muttered, "S, of course. Come in." We followed her into a neat, cozy little living room, where a small, 10-year-old television sat on a stand opposite a worn sofa and a second-hand rocking chair. The bathroom is down the hall, she muttered, avoiding our gaze. First door on the left. I went, took a leak, washed my hands, and came back as quickly as the call of nature would allow. Clarice sat on the sofa with her hands folded in her lap and her head bowed. Dad sat in the rocking chair in front of her and spoke in a low voice. "I can't tell you how sorry I am," he said. "Why didn't you tell me?" "We're doing well." "You're not okay, Clarice. I told you I would fix everything, but you have to let me." "I told you so," she said, looking at him with a little sparkle in her eyes. "Last year I sent you a letter. In your home so that no one in the office gets it and recognizes it. Then I told you I had problems." "I never saw it, Clarice. I swear." Although I knew where it went. Mom, damn it, of course. "Well, I did," she insisted. "I'm trying, Senator, but you have no idea what it's like, how hard it is." "How much do you pay her?" I interrupted him. "How much help do you get for Schuyler and everything else?" $1,500 a month, Dad said. $400 a month, Clarice said at the same time. Dad stared at her. "That's $1,500. "No, Dad," I said. "That's 400. That's how I found out about her. I have seen financial statements that show all the payments. There were always 400. I thought he was going to have a heart attack. But, what? It had to be. "Who was responsible for all this?" I asked. "I don't know," he said. "I mean Jim Parker, I guess." But I didn't tell him anything. It had to be. I just thought. "You left Mom in charge of this, didn't you?" He nodded, his face blank with shock. "And you," I said, turning to Clarice. "You probably sent other letters home, right?" She looked at Dad and said, "Yes, within 5 years. And when this man showed up at the door, he wanted to know what I found out, right?" "Yes," she whispered, tense from the memories. "And he said if you lie, they'll cut you off completely, right?" "Right." I looked from her to Dad. "I think I hit the nail on the head yesterday, Dad. She's a monster. Mom is a monster, and Stevie got her genes from her." He could only stare at me, although there was at least some good left in him. He was so shocked and disgusted by his mother's actions and the continued abuse of Clarice Talbot. "But you'll fix it, won't you, Dad?" He nodded. "You'll fix it right now, right?" He nodded again, a little faster. "Then get out your checkbook. Now." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled it out. "Fine," I said. "What are you waiting for? Start writing." He reached for the handle, and I turned to leave. I was 4 blocks away when I heard her screaming behind me. I turned around and saw Clarice Talbot running after me, waving for me to stop. I did so and then walked back to her. Seeing me return, she waited with her hands on her knees and gulping air. "I'm really sorry," I said. "I didn't know." "That's why you showed up, isn't it?" "Yes." "That's why you went to his games and cheered for him too." "Again," I said. "At first I thought he was my brother. I thought you and Dad, you got it." "How much do you know?" "I'm almost sure of everything. Dad told me this morning. He told me that Schuyler was my nephew, and he told me." She stood up, still catching her breath. "He told you what Stephen did to me. That's how it happened." I nodded, then said, "And he told me they support you and Schuyler too. But I saw your house, and I was pretty sure they could do better. Besides, I remember the look on your face when you opened the door for me. I heard you talking to someone on the phone. So you made him come here and tell me that. Well, you fixed everything, right? I didn't think you should live in fear or look back because of what I caused." "How did you do this, Emil?" "I ran away. Came here to find you and my little brother. That's what I thought. That's why I came here." "And you didn't tell anyone?" "Long story." "I'd like to hear it someday," she said, glaring at me. "Because whatever they do, it has to be more than just that. I've never seen anyone, and I mean anyone, talk to your father like that. Never. You wouldn't believe it." "I'm afraid that I would believe it. If this is connected with your mother, then I think now I would definitely believe it." "Yes, well, maybe someday I'll tell you about everything." I looked at her for a minute, then turned to continue on my way. "Mark," she called. I stopped and turned around. "Yes?" I know he's not your brother and all that, but he's still your nephew, you know? I know. Well, I just thought maybe you'd like to meet him sometime. I smiled. I would really like this, more than you can imagine. I hesitated and then said, but won't it be too hard for you, knowing that I'm the brother of the guy who, well, you know. She shook her head. You are not at all like him, not at all, and Schuyler needs someone else in his life. So any time you can spare, I think it will help. Any. I nodded. Be careful what you wish for. If I get my way, he'll play drums in the little band I'm planning to put together. She laughed. Thank you. That's what I was missing, a mini Dave Grohl, banging all day and night. We'll agree on his game on Sunday if it suits you. Great, she said. And Mark, thank you. Is it true? I waved my hand, then turned and walked further, towards the cold wind blowing in my face. Sandy was right. It was cold here. I decided to get warmer clothes because I clearly had no intention of leaving. It had been a long day, and I spent it walking from Clarice's house to the diner to pick up the car. I then called Whitney and made an appointment for her and Rebecca. After almost 2 hours of thinking and traveling, I arranged a meeting and told them everything. My parents, who showed up out of the blue, Sandy the day before, my nasty brother, my nephew, and Clarice. All this mess. When it was all over, they looked just as tired and exhausted as I felt. They refused to eat, so I wandered back to my squalid apartment. It was dark. I turned on the light in the kitchen. I hadn't eaten all day and my stomach was growling. I was still frozen to the bone, but decided not to make soup. So at 7:30, I sat alone at the table with an Italian pepper sandwich and salad on the side. I couldn't taste the food, but the beer helped calm my nerves. Looking at the clock 10 minutes to 8, I tossed the half-eaten food into the trash and headed to the bedroom. Opening the door, I heard movement on the bed and turned on the light. Sandy lay on the covers, curled up on her side, fast asleep. I smiled, not really worrying about how she got here. I undressed, put on pajama pants and a t-shirt, and lay down next to her. She mumbled and moved, then fell back into rhythmic breathing. I just lay there, content to watch her sleep for the first time in months. And then it dawned on me. I have the answer, if she does too. I thought it was a dream, she whispered when the sun woke me up. I turned to her with a smile. How did you get here? The door to the patio was open. You probably forgot to close it when you came in last night. When did you arrive? Late in the afternoon. I went to where you work, but they said you took the day off. I decided to wait, but it seems I fell asleep. Quite early, too. I went to bed before 8, and you were already dozing. I don't snore. I'll sign you up next time. Are you serious? She said, thoughtfully. Do I snore? Yes. What kind of snoring is this? What do you mean? Well, what? Loud and booming or small, almost unnoticeable? Loud and booming. It can't be, she objected, giggled, and pushed me away. I smiled, remembering the old Sandy, the one who was always like the wind, strong and constant. I came to tell you something, she said after a minute. What? I will go anywhere and do whatever you want on any of your terms, she said firmly and convincingly. Then her voice softened. If you decide to give us a second chance, give me a second chance. Even if it means staying here. Here, like in this city, or here, like in this wretched apartment. Is there a difference? She shrugged. We can afford a better place, but if you want to stay here, I will stay with you. I smiled. Are you sure? There is only one condition. Which? I asked, narrowing my eyes. This new you, the one who is going to do what he wants, he should remain that old you too. What do you mean? I fell in love with Mark Roberts, who loved me back and wanted to spend time with me. You want to play in a band and do something else, even work as a bartender, I don't care. But I want Mark, who sang to me on the patio and held my hand and let me pick my movies, to stay too. Or is this Mark no longer there? So, does that mean I have to watch all those snotty movies you always make me watch? She nodded, but didn't smile. Sorry, we can watch more of your films, but I still want to watch mine too. So what you're saying is that if we decide to try again, it should still be a partnership. I can't turn into a petty tyrant, right? Something like this. Even if it gets a little risque and involves some light spanking and exposure. Get out, she said, laughing and pushing me again with her playful smile. Putting yourself on display in this damned icy place? Are you kidding? So, spankings are accepted. She shrugged playfully. Why not? Your ass is like steel. It shouldn't hurt too much. I laughed, but fell silent, remembering what she had just said. Rebecca also said something similar about my average ass. What? I might have had a girlfriend here. Maybe? Was. She slowly changed her face, scared. Do you love her? It didn't come to that. But are you still dating her? See you a few times, Sandy, and then we just switched to friendship. But you? Yes. She closed her eyes and lay down on the bed. I really thought it was all over, I explained, that it was just a joke from the very beginning. She opened her eyes, still looking at the ceiling, and said, Can we talk about this sometime later? Are you sure this is a good idea? Absolutely. I just need to deal with this. How? She turned to me. You slept with her, that's me 3 years ago. You felt the same way I did back then, like this isn't a marriage, so what's the problem, right? About like this. So how can I hate you or yell at you or blame you for something? Especially considering that I did the same thing back then. Probably yes, but still. She shook her head. And you did this after you ran away, after I spent 3 years proving that I love you as much as you love me. It hurts too, but that's exactly when I did it to you. After the first few years, you showed me how much you loved me. I didn't do it out of spite, I said. We did it. It doesn't matter that it was just one time, she said, running her hand over my cheek. The important thing is that I have to deal with this, okay? And I can handle it. I promise. If you need more time to think, I began, but she stopped me with a kiss. I don't need more time, Mark. I know what I want, and I know we have things to overcome, okay? I just didn't expect to have to deal with it. It took me by surprise, although I don't know why. Are you saying that I'm a ladies' man? No, she said. You're just so damn attractive, and I'm surprised I didn't come here and see a whole swarm of girls circling you. Did I forget to mention them? She laughed, then pushed me away. Go brush your teeth. You're clearly on a roll today, Ferlin said as I cleared away the dishes after dinner. Things are looking up, my fat friend. Fat friend? I smiled. Definitely uphill. He looked at me for a while and then smiled. Well done. Thank you. Please. No, I mean for everything. Thank you. I understand what you mean, he muttered, and you are still on the right path. Does this mean you're quitting? Not now, but soon. Try to give me at least a week to prepare, okay? I'll give you 3. Fair. Rebecca and Whitney stopped by for drinks after work. You are together again, right? Whitney said, her face the happiest I've ever seen. It seems like that. Rebecca looked a little annoyed at first, but then she just smiled and shrugged. Well, maybe next time. I leaned over and said to both of them, This doesn't change anything for me. Besides Ferlin, Teddy Cooper, and Nick Harlan, you're the only people I know here. So are you staying here? Said Rebecca. Aren't you going back to your high-paying job in Memphis? I'm staying here. With her? With Sandy. Yes. She smiled for real. Cool. Hello, dear, the guy said, approaching us. Whitney's face lit up. Hello to you too, dear. He leaned over and kissed her, then turned to me and said, A bottle of Budweiser? Aaron, Whitney told him, this is Mark Roberts I told you about. He smiled lazily, but his eyes narrowed, sizing me up. "Hi, Mark," he said, extending his hand. "You're a cop, right?" I said, shaking his hand. "Did she tell you?" "No, just a lucky guess." When they left half an hour later, Rebecca caught my eye and then looked at her hand on the bar. I looked down too and saw her slowly slide a small folded piece of paper towards the edge of the bar. When she removed her hand, I looked at her face again. With a wide smile and a playful wiggle of her eyebrows, she left. I looked at her magnificent figure until she disappeared through the door. Then I picked up the note and read it. Loyola Law School has 3 vacancies for assistant professor positions starting next fall, the note read. Thought you might be interested. I thought about it, then put the note in my pocket. Of course I was interested. Sandy met me for drinks after work, and we were sitting in the corner when her father came in with my father. "Mark," he called, smiling fakely from ear to ear. "Pat," I replied, not bothering to stand up or extend my hand. He paused, his smile fading, then he gathered it all up and moved on. "So, we found you, boy. Do you mind if I sit down?" "Yes, Daddy, we don't mind," Sandy said with a sickly sweet smile on her face. His features darkened, and this time the smile disappeared forever. Then he grew taller, trying to take full advantage of his natural advantages. "I just want to know you're okay," he said. "We're leaving, Daddy," Sandy said. "Understood? We will live here now, and we don't want anything to do with any of you. Nothing. Not a damn thing. You, Mom, the Senator, and Deborah, you will all be out of the picture now, understand?" "Who are you?" "Come on, Mark," she said, pushing off the bar stool and grabbing my hand. I let her lead me past them to the door. However, halfway there, she stopped and turned around. "And let's get this straight, Daddy," she said, growling at the part about Daddy. "You leave us alone and make sure everyone else leaves us alone too. If the press shows up at our front door, I'll tell them straight. All this. Then you can explain to the poor Tennessee voters how you used your own daughter to make them all look like fools." His face was filled with rage, and his massive fists were clenched at his sides. "Tell me you understand," she said through clenched teeth. He just looked. "Say it," she demanded. "I understand." With these words, she turned around again and angrily led me out the door. She followed me back to my crummy apartment. Before Sandy arrived, and before I decided to try again, I was happy with the place. Damn, it suited my needs. However, now I feel a little awkward. Rebecca was right. It was more of a dorm room than a home. "I'm starving," Sandy said, unwrapping her jacket, sweater, hat, and scarf, shaking her hair as she did so. "Do you have anything to eat?" "Sandwich," I said. She gave me her famous quizzical look, half, "What the hell," and half, "You can't be serious." "Is that all?" To him. "Is this what you've been living with for the last 2 months?" To him. She started to smile. "What sandwich?" I walked over to the freezer and opened it. It's Thursday, so it's Tex-Mex made with ground bison. "Bison, how's the buffalo meat?" "How about buffalo meat?" "This is good." "I have no idea. I haven't tried it yet." She closed the distance between us and hugged me, burying her face in my chest. "You have already changed, Mark, and I think for the better." "How so?" "I don't know. You just have it." "So, are you ready for some sleazy jokes?" "Certainly." She helped me defrost and then carefully reheat the sandwich filling. 20 minutes later, we sat across from each other at a tiny table, unable to take our eyes off each other as we ate, but unable to really say anything either. When I finished and set the plate aside, I reached across the table and ran my fingertips along the back of Sandy's hand. This started the hydraulic structures. Wiping away the tears that rolled down her cheeks, I asked, "What happened?" "I thought I lost you. For 2 months, I was afraid that I would never see you again. Then, when I finally found you, the look on your face when you sang that song." "Sorry," I said. "It's not your fault," she said. "This is mine, and them. Mostly them." She took my hand and ran it across her cheek before kissing it. If this happens again, if it doesn't work and you decide to move on, at least tell me to my face, okay? It'll work out, Sandy, I said, knowing I meant every word. But if that doesn't happen, promise me you won't just disappear. I promise. She smiled and leaned towards my hand. Thank you. After a few minutes, we both relaxed. I stood at the sink and washed dishes while Sandy dried and put them away. As we did this, she became more and more playful, reaching out to shake water on my shirt until I did the same to her and went overboard. I'm wet, she said, looking at the wet fabric covering most of the front of her blouse. Serves you right. Wonderful, she said, and a familiar curl rose at the corners of her lips and a twinkle danced in her eyes. Perhaps now, as well as any time. She started to unbutton her blouse, but I decided to play dumb. What are you doing? You know damn well what I'm doing. I shook my head and leaned back. I have no idea. We need to finish the dishes here. I have an itch that needs to be scratched first. But the dishes, I objected. Itching comes first. So if this gaggle of groupies hasn't tired you out, get to work. I bowed my head and kissed her. Her figure, originally slender, became almost gaunt. Wait, I said, stepping back. What's the matter? She asked, her face confused and more than a little offended. I smiled broadly at her. I want to watch you undress. Right here, she said, her eyes darting straight to the window above the sink, then over her shoulder to the sliding glass doors behind us. You started it, I said. Is this what you threatened me with? She said. The pain went away and the shine returned. Maybe. Is everyone here like you, or do you just spend your nights alone watching videos on the internet? I won't tell. We made love. An hour and a half later, we were lying in bed together. You seem to have really worked up an appetite, don't you? I said. She grinned. As I already said, it was a very strong itch. Are you planning to kill me with sex? Maybe. Punishment? Are you complaining? No. Her smile turned from mischievous to nostalgic, and I asked, What are you thinking about? She sighed, then said, It still seems unreal, you know. In what sense? I was so scared. All these weeks I thought I would never see you again. And then, when Mom told me that you didn't know anything, I was sure that you just ran away from me. Does this make everything more real? It does, she said, clinging to me. I mean, the sex was great, you know how much I need it, but this part, Mark, just you holding me. When I woke up in your arms, it almost seemed real, but I still want to fall asleep the same way. Are you asking if you can stay the night? Isn't it too early? No, I said, shaking my head. I think I need this too. She smiled happily and clung to me even tighter. After a few minutes, she began to snore softly, her breath tickling the hair on my chest. The next morning, she woke me up in the same way that she had previously only done on Sundays. I recommend it to anyone who wants to start the day right. Friday night over dinner, I told Sandy about everything that had happened. I told her about Clarice Talbot, about what my brother had done, and about my nephew, whom I never knew about. She was shocked, but not entirely surprised, that Stephen was involved. Sorry, Mark, she said. I know he's your brother and all, but he's always had a cruel streak. I used to think it made him strong, but it doesn't. Sometimes he was just cruel. But you loved him, I remarked. She shook her head. I loved the idea of him, about him and me together, like prom king and queen living together in a beautiful house and having beautiful children. Later, as I told you, I realized that he would have been like all those scoundrel husbands. I'd have a house and kids and dinner clubs, but I'd never have a soul mate. Do you consider me your soul mate? I asked, a little surprised that she said that. You know that yes, she said, surprised that I even asked such a question. Do you consider me your soul mate? No, I said. I consider you the yin to my yang. You complete me where I need a compliment. And isn't this the same thing? I think not. She said, pursing her lips, thinking it over. I then told her about my performances and how that led to meeting Teddy and Nick, who helped me polish my songs. At first, she wasn't interested because she didn't understand who they were. They wrote all this music for Leadfoot, I said, explaining to her. Her eyes lit up with understanding. And now they are in the group General Beauregard. Exactly. Wow, she said. Okay, that's really cool, I guess. Exactly, I said, pleased with myself. And they are going to record your songs. No, they will help me sell them to other artists. She thought for a moment and then said, and this is what you want to do now, write songs. Partially. I'm thinking about trying to get a job as a law professor so I can work full-time. Professor, she said, then laughed and gave me an evil grin. So, it's not enough that you have a lot of fans, now all these students will fawn over you? I laughed. It's never enough. What if I start dressing like a student, Professor? She snuggled closer. Short skirts and a too tight white blouse, or maybe behave badly in class? You're a naughty girl, I laughed, then pushed her to her knees and spanked her ass hard. Oh. Oh, good or oh bad? Oh, I've been a naughty girl, she said, looking over her shoulder and challenging me. This led to some pretty energetic romp through alleys we had never walked before. At noon on Sunday, Sandy and I sat next to Clarice Talbot, the three of us huddled under one umbrella as the freezing rain pattered on us. Our banter, through chattering teeth and constant trembling, was focused on the weather this far north. I doubt I would have seen him if someone hadn't gotten up and left shortly before the end of the first quarter. He sat all alone, without an umbrella, his baseball cap was wet, and his shoulders were hunched from the weather. However, even from where we were, I could tell he was lost in thought as he watched his grandson run across the muddy field. I nudged Sandy, and she looked. The expression on her face was incomprehensible. Clarice turned and looked and said almost to herself, "You know, it was never his fault. None of this happened." I held my tongue, but Sandy didn't. If he cared enough, he would personally intervene. "She is his wife, though," Clarice said. "If you can't trust your wife, who can you trust?" Sandy looked at me, then looked down. I took her frozen hand in mine and squeezed it, trying to warm her skin. "You're right," I told Clarice. "I don't think it's easy to believe that such things are actually possible, coming from the woman you gave your heart and soul to all those years ago." "But he could be there for you," Sandy whispered after a moment. "He could have tried harder, tried to be a part of Schuyler's life." Clarice sighed. "Yes, it's possible, although I'm not entirely sure I would let him." "Then why now?" "Because a lot of time has passed, and now he's trying to do the right thing. It's not just about money, although that certainly helps. Although it is not his responsibility. I think it was a disgrace to Stephen and who he was and what he did." Clarice turned to me. "I don't know what he did to you, but I know it was more than that. However, I don't think it was his fault. You can think about it." I didn't move, I just looked at him, alone with my thoughts. The Generals managed to score a touchdown late in the third quarter. Not Schuyler, but a defender. However, Schuyler threw a key block just in front of the goal line. They held on and won 6-0. He ran up to us after the game and hugged my mother tightly, so that her raincoat was covered in mud. "We did it," he said, full of energy even after a day on the destroyed field. "Invincible, Mom. Do you know what this means?" "No, honey," she said, combing his hair back with her fingers. "What does it mean?" "I got a trophy," he said, smiling, which emphasized the absence of baby teeth. Then he turned to us. "Whose parents are you?" Clarice knelt before him. "This is your Uncle Mark," she said, "and your Aunt Sandy." He looked puzzled. "Do I have an uncle? And aunt?" To the side, I saw my father watching him shift from foot to foot, a mask of sadness on his face. I cleared my throat and nodded to my father when Clarice looked. She looked, then smiled sadly. "And grandfather, too." "Grandfather." "He's there, dear." Schuyler turned and looked, not knowing what to do. After a minute of staring, he said in a small voice, "Are you my grandfather?" Dad hesitated, then nodded. Schuyler crossed the 15 feet between him and Dad, stopped, and looked up. "Where have you been?" Dad cleared his throat, and I saw that he was holding back tears. His body tensed, and it seemed like it was all he could do not to bend down and take the little boy into his arms. After a moment, he said, "I guess I haven't been a very good grandfather, have I?" "No," said the boy. They looked at each other for a minute or more. Then, as if in slow motion, Schuyler extended his tiny hand and said, "Can you buy me some hot cocoa before it runs out?" Tears mixed with the rain on Dad's face, and he croaked, "Yes, I wish I could." The little boy led him to a tiny snack bar near the end zone, already filled with players. "He wants to be a part of Schuyler's life," Clarice said, watching them. "We talked about it after you left, and I think it would be good for Schuyler." "And my mother?" I said. She shook her head sharply. "He didn't think it was wise." "He's right." The whole group of us headed towards the diner, standing to the side. "Do you have plans for an early dinner?" Sandy said to Clarice. She shrugged. "Probably just soup and sandwiches, on such a cold day." "You won't believe your luck," Sandy said, beaming under the gray sky. "You think Schuyler likes bacon and tomatoes on his grilled cheese?" I looked at Sandy and grinned. "But Sunday is not grilled cheese night." "It's now," she said, then turned to Clarice. "Are you guys home?" Dad declined Sandy's invitation to dinner. "Thank you," he said, unable to meet my gaze. "Is it true? However, I have a flight back to Washington. We have some work to do, and I really need to be there." "Will we see you again soon?" Sandy said. He looked up with disbelief on his face. "Do you still want—" He turned to me, but my face was uncompromising. His eyes fell again. I let it simmer for a while and then said, "I don't know, Dad. You used me." "I know, and I'm really sorry, more than you will ever know." "But now you have a grandson," I said. "A grandson who doesn't need to be abandoned a second time." His eyes flickered to Clarice and Schuyler, who were walking towards her car. "Is it already too late?" "Yes, it's already late, but better late than never, right?" "And your mother?" he said, still looking at Schuyler with an expression of melancholy that I had not seen on his face for a long time. "It looks like you have a choice," I said. He looked at me again, trying to see any spark of forgiveness, but I didn't give him one. After a moment, his lips pursed, and he nodded slowly. I took Sandy's hand and left him there in the rain. 9 months later, I was standing at the front door of our small house, 2 blocks from my nephew's house. "Hurry up," I shouted. "I'll be late for the train." "I found it," Sandy shouted. I heard her run down the corridor. "Don't rush. Lord, you're going to fall." She slid to the stop at the end of the corridor, smiled widely, and picked up her camera, taking a few pictures. "Look at yourself. You look amazing." "Do you think so?" I said, pulling up the lapels of my jacket to straighten it. "My own professor," she said, lowering the camera before walking over to me and tightening the knot in her tie. "This is simply amazing." "Do you think so?" "Think." "Well, I think this is even more amazing," I said, reaching out and gently touching her stomach, where a slight round belly was already visible. "Amazing?" she asked, her hand covering mine, pressing her to our growing baby. "Is that even a word?" "It must be." She beamed, then leaned over and kissed me on the lips. "Strike them down, Professor." Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even click to the next one.